The rise of the Ottoman Empire is one of the most remarkable transformations in world history. From a small frontier principality in northwestern Anatolia, the Ottomans grew into a powerful empire that would dominate Southeast Europe, Western Asia, and North Africa for more than 6 centuries. Understanding the early rise of the Ottoman state requires examining the political collapse of earlier powers, the social and religious dynamics of the medieval Islamic world, and the exceptional leadership and adaptability of the early Ottoman rulers. This first part focuses on the historical background, the origins of the Ottomans, and the foundations that enabled their extraordinary ascent. The historical context in which the Ottomans emerged was shaped by instability and fragmentation. By the late 13th century, the once mighty Seljuk Sultanate of Rum, which had ruled much of Anatolia, was in steep decline. The Mongol invasions of the 13th century had shattered centralized authority across much of the Islamic world, including Anatolia. After the Seljuks became vassals of the Mongols, their power weakened significantly, and local Turkish warlords, known as beys, established semi-independent principalities called beyliks. These beyliks competed with one another for land, resources, and followers, creating a politically fluid environment where ambitious leaders could rise rapidly. Anatolia during this period was a frontier zone, both geographically and culturally. It lay at the crossroads of the Islamic world and the Christian Byzantine Empire. This borderland, known as the Uch region, was characterized by frequent warfare, population movement, and religious interaction. Muslim Ghazis, warriors motivated by faith and the promise of booty, regularly raided Byzantine territories. This frontier culture rewarded military skill, charisma, and the ability to attract loyal followers. It was within this dynamic and volatile environment that the Ottomans first appeared. The founder of the Ottoman state was Osman I, a leader whose name would later give rise to the term Ottoman, derived from the Arabic form Uthman. Osman was the son of Ertugrul, a minor tribal leader of the Kayi branch of the Oghuz Turks. Ertugrul had led his followers westward into Anatolia, where they entered the service of the Seljuk sultans and were granted land near the Byzantine frontier. This location proved crucial, as it placed Osman and his followers at the edge of Byzantine territory, providing opportunities for expansion through raids and conquests. Osman's leadership marked the true beginning of Ottoman power. Although little contemporary documentation survives about his life, later Ottoman chroniclers portray him as a brave, just, and divinely favored ruler. One of the most famous legends associated with Osman is the Dream of Osman, in which he dreams of a great tree growing from his body and spreading its branches across the world. This dream was later interpreted as a prophecy of Ottoman imperial destiny, reinforcing the idea that the Ottoman rise was not merely political, but also divinely ordained. Under Osman's leadership, the Ottomans began to expand at the expense of the weakening Byzantine Empire. Byzantine authority in Anatolia had been eroding for decades due to internal conflicts, economic decline, and pressure from Turkish groups. Osman took advantage of this weakness by capturing small forts and towns, gradually extending his control. These early conquests were not large-scale campaigns, but incremental advances that steadily increased Ottoman territory and influence. One of the key reasons for Ottoman success during this early period was their flexible and inclusive approach to governance. Unlike some rival beyliks, the Ottomans did not rely solely on tribal ties. Instead, they welcomed a diverse range of followers, including other Turkish warriors, Muslim scholars, and even Christian converts. This inclusivity allowed the Ottomans to expand their manpower and administrative capacity far beyond what a single tribe could provide. Religion played an important role in legitimizing Ottoman expansion, but it was not the only motivating factor. The concept of Gaza, or holy struggle, was central to Ottoman ideology, especially in the frontier context. Ottoman leaders presented their wars against the Byzantines as religiously sanctioned campaigns, which helped attract Ghazi warriors eager for spiritual reward and material gain. However, modern historians emphasize that economic opportunity, land acquisition, and political ambition were equally important drivers of Ottoman expansion. The early Ottoman military organization was another crucial factor in their rise. Ottoman forces were initially composed of light cavalry and irregular warriors who were well suited to frontier warfare. These fighters were mobile, adaptable, and experienced in raiding tactics. Over time, the Ottomans began to develop more structured military institutions, laying the groundwork for the sophisticated army that would later become one of the most formidable fighting forces in the world. Following Osman's death around 1324, leadership passed to his son, Orhan. Orhan played a decisive role in transforming the Ottoman Beylik into a more centralized and durable state. Under Orhan's rule, the Ottomans achieved one of their most significant early victories, the capture of Bursa in 1326. Bursa was a major Byzantine city and an important economic center. Its conquest marked a turning point as it became the first Ottoman capital and provided the resources needed for further expansion. The capture of Bursa had profound political and economic consequences. It gave the Ottomans control over fertile agricultural land, trade routes, and urban infrastructure. Bursa also became a center of administration, culture, and Islamic learning. Orhan introduced important institutional reforms, including the minting of Ottoman coins and the establishment of formal administrative offices. These developments signaled the transition from a tribal principality to a functioning state. Orhan also expanded Ottoman territory along the Sea of Marmara, capturing key towns such as Nicaea, Iznik, and Nicomedia, Izmit. These conquests further weakened Byzantine control in Anatolia and brought the Ottomans closer to Constantinople. At the same time, Orhan pursued diplomatic strategies alongside military action. He formed alliances through marriage, including a notable marriage to a Byzantine princess, which helped legitimize Ottoman rule and reduce resistance in newly conquered areas. A defining feature of early Ottoman governance was their pragmatic treatment of non-Muslim subjects. Rather than forcing mass conversions, the Ottomans allowed Christians to retain their religion, property, and local customs in exchange for loyalty and taxes. This policy reduced resistance and encouraged stability in newly conquered areas. By the mid-1350s, the Ottomans were no longer confined to Anatolia. A critical moment in their rise came with their first permanent crossing into Europe. In 1354, an earthquake severely damaged the Byzantine fortress of Gallipoli, allowing Ottoman forces to occupy it with little resistance. This event marked the beginning of Ottoman expansion into the Balkans and transformed the Ottomans from a regional Anatolian power into a transcontinental state. The Ottoman entry into Europe was facilitated by the political fragmentation of the Balkans. The region was divided among competing kingdoms, principalities, and city-states, many of which were weakened by internal disputes and external threats. The Ottomans exploited these divisions skillfully, often presenting themselves as allies or protectors before asserting direct control. This strategy allowed them to expand rapidly with relatively limited military resources. Another important aspect of the Ottoman rise was the development of a distinctive political identity. Early Ottoman rulers emphasized justice, order, and loyalty to the ruler as central values. The Sultan was portrayed not only as a military leader, but also a protector of Islam and a guarantor of social stability. This ideology helped unify diverse populations under Ottoman rule and reinforced the legitimacy of the dynasty. By the end of Orhan's reign in 1362, the foundations of the Ottoman Empire had been firmly established. The Ottomans controlled significant territory in both Anatolia and Southeast Europe, possessed a growing administrative structure, and had developed a reputation as a disciplined and effective power. The combination of military skill, political pragmatism, religious legitimacy, and favorable historical circumstances enabled their rapid rise. In conclusion, the rise of the Ottoman Empire was not the result of a single event or individual, but a complex process shaped by frontier conditions, institutional innovation, and capable leadership. The early Ottomans took advantage of the decline of older powers, adapted to changing circumstances, and built a flexible system of rule that could incorporate diverse peoples and regions. Part 1 of this history highlights how a small frontier beylik, under leaders like Osman and Orhan, laid the groundwork for an empire that would soon dominate much of the known world. In the next part, the focus will shift to the consolidation of Ottoman power in the Balkans.
The second phase of the Ottoman Empire's rise marks the transformation of a growing frontier state into a dominant regional power, especially through its deep expansion into the Balkans and the strengthening of its political, military, and administrative institutions. Building upon the foundations laid by Osman I and Orhan, the Ottomans in the mid to late 14th and early 15th centuries demonstrated an extraordinary ability to adapt to new environments, manage diverse populations, and wage effective warfare. This period was defined not only by territorial conquest, but also by consolidation, innovation, and the emergence of a truly imperial vision. After the death of Orhan in 1362, leadership passed to his son, Murad I, whose reign proved decisive in shaping the Ottoman future. Murad inherited a state that already spanned parts of Anatolia and southeastern Europe, but it was under his rule that the Ottomans became firmly established as a Balkan power. Murad recognized that long-term success depended more than raiding and temporary occupation. It required stable administration, permanent settlement, and military superiority. His reign thus represents a shift from opportunistic frontier expansion to deliberate imperial strategy. One of Murad I's most significant actions was the relocation of the Ottoman capital from Bursa to Edirne, Adrianople, after its capture in 1369. This move symbolized a strategic reorientation toward Europe. Edirne's location allowed the Ottomans to oversee Balkan territories more effectively and to launch campaigns deeper into southeastern Europe. The city soon became a political, military, and cultural center, reflecting the Ottomans' growing confidence and ambition as a transcontinental power. The Balkan world into which the Ottomans expanded was deeply fragmented. Serbia, Bulgaria, Byzantium, and various smaller principalities were weakened by internal rivalries, dynastic disputes, and economic strain. Rather than confronting all enemies at once, the Ottomans pursued a flexible policy that combined warfare, diplomacy, and vassalage. Many Balkan rulers were allowed to retain their thrones in exchange for tribute, military support, and political loyalty. This approach minimized resistance while extending Ottoman influence steadily across the region. Military innovation played a crucial role in Ottoman success during this period. Under Murad I, the Ottomans began to develop a more centralized and disciplined army. The most important innovation was the formation of the Janissaries, an elite infantry force directly loyal to the Sultan. Recruited primarily through the Devshirme system, which involved the collection of Christian boys from the Balkans who were converted to Islam and trained for state service, the Janissaries became one of the most effective standing armies of the medieval world. Their discipline, training, and use of new technologies gave the Ottomans a decisive edge over feudal armies. The Devshirme system, though controversial, was a key element of Ottoman state building. By recruiting administrators and soldiers from outside the traditional Turkish nobility, the sultans reduced the power of rival elites and ensured loyalty to the central authority. Many Devshirme recruits rose to the highest positions in government and the military, demonstrating the Ottomans' meritocratic tendencies.
This system strengthened the state and contributed to its long-term stability. Murad I's reign culminated in one of the most significant battles of the medieval Balkans, the Battle of Kosovo in 1389. This confrontation between Ottoman forces and a coalition of Christian armies, led by Serbian-led Christian armies, marked a turning point in regional history. Although Murad himself was killed during or shortly after the battle, the Ottomans emerged victorious. The defeat weakened Serbian resistance and confirmed Ottoman dominance in much of the Balkans. Kosovo became a powerful symbol in both Ottoman and Balkan historical memory, representing sacrifice, transformation, and the irreversible shift of power in the region. Following Murad's death, his son, Bayezid I, ascended the throne. Known as Yildirim, the Thunderbolt, for his speed and decisiveness, Bayezid accelerated Ottoman expansion with remarkable energy. He moved quickly to consolidate control over the Balkans, reducing the autonomy of vassal states and incorporating them more directly into the empire. At the same time, he turned his attention back to Anatolia, where rival Turkish beyliks still posed a challenge to Ottoman authority. Bayezid's campaigns in Anatolia were aimed at unifying Turkish lands under Ottoman rule. Through a combination of conquest and diplomacy, he absorbed several beyliks, significantly expanding Ottoman territory. This process strengthened the empire economically and strategically, but also created tensions with powerful external forces, particularly the rising Central Asian conqueror Timur or Tamerlane. Bayezid's rapid expansion brought the Ottomans into direct conflict with Timur's ambitions, setting the stage for a dramatic confrontation. In Europe, Bayezid faced growing resistance from Christian powers alarmed by Ottoman advances. This culminated in the Crusade of Nicopolis in 1396, one of the last major crusades of the Middle Ages. A coalition of European lights, led by the Kingdom of Hungary and supported by French and Burgundian forces, marched against the Ottomans. Bayezid's decisive victory at Nicopolis shocked Europe and confirmed the Ottomans as a major military power. The defeat exposed the weaknesses of feudal European armies when confronted by a disciplined and centrally commanded force. Despite these successes, Bayezid's reign ended in crisis. In 1902, the Ottomans suffered a catastrophic defeat at the Battle of Ankara against Timur. Bayezid was captured, and the Ottoman state plunged into a period of civil war known as the Ottoman Interregnum. For over a decade, Bayezid's sons fought amongst themselves for control of the empire, threatening to undo decades of expansion and consolidation. The Interregnum was a severe test of Ottoman resilience. Territories were lost, vassals rebelled, and rival powers sought to exploit Ottoman weakness. Yet this period also revealed the strength of the institutions the Ottomans had built. Administrative continuity, local governance structures, and the loyalty of key military units helped prevent complete collapse. Ultimately, Mehmed I emerged victorious in 1413, reunifying the empire and restoring central authority. Mehmed I's reign focused on reconstruction and reconciliation. Rather than pursuing aggressive expansion, he prioritized internal stability, re-established control over rebellious regions, and repaired relations with neighboring states. His policies demonstrated a mature understanding of statecraft and underscored the importance of balance between conquest and consolidation. By the time of his death in 1421, the Ottoman state had recovered much of its strength and cohesion. The process of recovery continued under Murad II, who resumed expansion in both the Balkans and Anatolia. Murad II faced renewed crusading efforts from Europe, including campaigns supported by Hungary and Poland. Despite occasional setbacks, such as temporary treaties forced upon him, Murad II ultimately defeated Christian coalitions at battles like Varna in 1444 and the Second Battle of Kosovo in 1448.
These victories reaffirmed Ottoman dominance in southeastern Europe and effectively ended large-scale crusading efforts against the empire. Throughout this period, the Ottomans refined their system of governance. Land was distributed through the Timar system, which granted revenues to cavalry officers in exchange for military service. This system tied military strength directly to agricultural productivity and ensured a steady supply of troops. At the same time, Islamic law, Sharia, combined with sultanic decrees, Kanun, to create a flexible legal framework capable of governing a diverse empire. Cultural and religious tolerance also contributed to Ottoman stability. Christian and Jewish communities were allowed a significant degree of autonomy under the millet system, managing their own religious and legal affairs in exchange for loyalty and taxes. This pragmatic approach reduced unrest and facilitated the integration of conquered populations. Many communities viewed Ottoman rule as predictable and relatively just compared to the instability of previous regimes. By the mid-15th century, the Ottomans had emerged from crisis stronger and more centralized than before. Their army was professional, their administration increasingly sophisticated, and their leadership experienced in both war and governance. The empire now surrounded Constantinople, the ancient symbol of Byzantine Empire, which stood as both a symbolic and strategic prize. The stage was set for one of the most dramatic events in world history, the conquest of Constantinople. In conclusion, Part 2 of the Ottoman Empire's rise illustrates how conquest alone was never sufficient for lasting power. The Ottomans combined military innovation, administrative reform, and political pragmatism to survive.
The third phase of the Ottoman Empire's rise represents the moment when the Ottomans moved beyond regional dominance and entered the stage of world history as a true imperial power. This period is defined above all by the reign of Mehmed II, known to history as Mehmed the Conqueror, and by the capture of Constantinople in 1453. Yet the significance of this era goes far beyond a single dramatic event. It encompasses the final destruction of the Byzantine Empire, the reorganization of the Ottoman state on imperial lines, and the transformation of the Ottomans into a centralized, multi-ethnic, and globally influential empire. By the time Mehmed II ascended the throne in 1451, the Ottoman state had already recovered from the crises of the early 15th century and reasserted its authority in both Anatolia and the Balkans. Constantinople, however, remained an anomaly. The city, once the heart of the Eastern Roman Empire, was now a shrinking and weakened remnant surrounded almost entirely by Ottoman territory. Though its political power had faded, Constantinople retained immense symbolic, strategic, and economic importance. For the Ottomans, its conquest was both a practical necessity and a powerful ideological goal. Mehmed II approached the challenge of Constantinople with careful preparation and extraordinary determination. Unlike earlier sultans who had attempted and failed to capture the city, Mehmed understood that success required innovation, resources, and centralized control. He immediately began strengthening the Ottoman navy, recognizing that control of the sea was essential to isolating the city. He also ordered the construction of the massive fortress of Rumeli Hisari on the European side of the Bosporus, directly opposite an earlier Ottoman fortress on the Asian shore. This strategic move allowed the Ottomans to control maritime traffic through the strait and cut off Byzantine supply lines. Military technology played a decisive role in Mehmed's strategy. The Ottomans employed large cannons, including massive bombards capable of breaching Constantinople's legendary walls, which had withstood seizures for over 1,000 years. These cannons, designed by engineers from across Europe, symbolized the changing nature of warfare in the 15th century. Mehmed's willingness to adopt and invest in new technologies reflected the Ottomans' broader adaptability and openness to innovation, qualities that had long underpinned their rise. The siege of Constantinople began in April 1453 and lasted for nearly 2 months. Despite desperate resistance by the Byzantine defenders, led by Emperor Constantine XI, the city was isolated and outmatched. Mehmed combined relentless artillery bombardment with naval pressure and repeated infantry assaults. One of the most remarkable moments of the siege occurred when Ottoman forces transported ships overland into the Golden Horn, bypassing a defensive chain and undermining Byzantine naval defenses. This bold maneuver demonstrated Mehmed's creativity and strategic vision. On May 29, 1453, Ottoman forces finally breached the walls and captured Constantinople. The death of Emperor Constantine XI during the final assault symbolized the end of the Byzantine Empire, which had endured in various forms for over a millennium. The fall of Constantinople sent shockwaves throughout Europe and the Islamic world. For Christians, it represented a profound loss and a turning point in medieval history. For Muslims, it was celebrated as the fulfillment of a long-standing prophecy and a triumph of Islamic power. Mehmed II moved quickly to consolidate his victory. Rather than allowing the city to decline, he made Constantinople the new Ottoman capital, renaming it Istanbul, and embarking on an ambitious program of reconstruction. He encouraged the resettlement of Muslims, Christians, and Jews from across the empire to repopulate the city, transforming it into a vibrant, cosmopolitan center. Churches were converted into mosques, most famously the Hagia Sophia, but religious communities were also granted protection and autonomy, reflecting the Ottomans' pragmatic approach to governance. The conquest of Constantinople marked a profound transformation in Ottoman political identity. Mehmed II adopted the title of Kaiser-i Rum, or Caesar of Rome, claiming to be the legitimate successor to the Roman emperors. This claim was not merely symbolic, it reflected Mehmed's ambition to rule a universal empire that transcended ethnic and religious boundaries. By incorporating elements of Byzantine administrative practice and court ceremony, Mehmed reinforced the imperial character of the Ottoman state. Following the conquest, Mehmed II launched a series of campaigns aimed at securing and expanding Ottoman dominance. In the Balkans, he moved to eliminate remaining pockets of resistance, conquering Serbia, Bosnia, and much of Greece. In Anatolia, he subdued rival Turkish dynasties and brought the region firmly under Ottoman control. These campaigns were characterized by careful planning, overwhelming force, and the strategic use of diplomacy to isolate enemies. Mehmed's reign was also marked by significant administrative and legal reforms. He codified sultanic laws, known as kanun-names, which clarified the relationship between the sultan, the military, and the bureaucracy. These laws complemented Islamic law and provided a coherent framework for governing a vast and diverse empire. Mehmed strengthened central authority by reducing the power of local elites and ensuring that key officials were directly dependent on the sultan's favor. The Ottoman military continued to evolve during this period. The Janissaries became a permanent, salaried force equipped with firearms, making them one of the earliest gunpowder infantry units in the world. Artillery units were expanded and professionalized, and the Navy grew into a formidable force capable of projecting power across the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. These military innovations allowed the Ottomans to compete with and often surpass contemporary European powers. Economic policy was another pillar of Ottoman imperial strength. Control of Constantinople gave the Ottomans command over critical trade routes linking Europe and Asia. Mehmed encouraged commerce by protecting merchants, standardizing taxation, and investing in infrastructure such as markets, roads, and ports. The empire's economic vitality supported its military and administrative institutions and reinforced its position as a central hub of global trade. Culturally, Mehmed II was a patron of learning and the arts. He invited scholars, artists, and architects from across the Islamic world and Europe to his court. Mehmed himself was educated in multiple languages and took a keen interest in history, philosophy, and science. This cultural openness contributed to the development of a distinctive Ottoman imperial culture that blended Islamic, Turkish, Byzantine, and European elements. The impact of the Ottoman rise during this period extended far beyond the empire's borders. The fall of Constantinople is often cited as a catalyst for the European Renaissance, as Greek scholars fled westward, bringing classical knowledge with them. At the same time, European states were forced to rethink their political and military strategies in response to the Ottoman threat. The Ottomans became a central factor in European diplomacy, trade, and warfare. By the time of Mehmed II's death in April 1481, the Ottoman Empire had been transformed into a powerful, centralized, and expansionist state. Its territory spanned southeastern Europe, Anatolia, and key maritime regions. Its institutions were robust, its military formidable, and its ruler recognized as one of the most powerful monarchs of his age. The foundations laid during Mehmed's reign would support further expansion under his successors, including the eventual conquest of the Arab lands and the empire's emergence as a dominant force in the early modern world. In conclusion, Part 3 of the Ottoman Empire's rise represents the culmination of a long process of growth, adaptation, and ambition. The conquest of Constantinople was not an isolated event, but the result of decades of institutional development and strategic vision. Under Mehmed II, the Ottomans completed their transformation from a regional power into a world empire, reshaping the political, cultural, and economic landscape of Eurasia. This moment marked the true beginning of the Ottoman Empire's imperial age.
The fourth phase of the Ottoman Empire's rise marks the transition from imperial consolidation to global supremacy. After the foundational conquests and reforms of Mehmed II, the Ottomans entered a period of rapid expansion, administrative refinement, and cultural flourishing that would elevate them to the status of one of the world's greatest early modern empires. This era, spanning the late 15th and early 16th centuries, is defined by strong sultans, decisive military victories, and the incorporation of vast new territories in the Middle East, North Africa, and Eastern Europe. Following the death of Mehmed II in 1481, the Ottoman throne passed to his son Bayezid II. Although Bayezid II lacked the aggressive temperament of his father, his reign was crucial for stabilizing and consolidating the empire. Bayezid focused on internal administration, legal consistency, and economic recovery, ensuring that the conquests of the previous decades were effectively integrated into the Ottoman system. His cautious approach helped prevent overextension and allowed the empire to strengthen its institutions before embarking on further expansion. One of the most significant events of Bayezid II's reign was the Ottoman response to the expulsion of Jews from Spain in 1492. Bayezid welcomed thousands of Sephardic Jewish refugees into Ottoman lands, recognizing their economic and intellectual value. These communities settled in cities such as Istanbul, Salonika, and Edirne, contributing to trade, medicine, scholarship, and finance. This policy reflected the Ottomans' pragmatic tolerance and enhanced the empire's economic vitality and cultural diversity. During Bayezid II's reign, the Ottoman navy began to emerge as a major force. Ottoman corsairs, operating with state support, challenged European powers in the Mediterranean, particularly Venice and Spain. Control of key islands and coastal regions strengthened Ottoman maritime influence and protected vital trade routes. Although Bayezid II avoided large-scale naval wars, the foundations were laid for future dominance at sea. The rise of the Safavid dynasty in Persia posed a new ideological and political challenge to the Ottomans. The Safavids promoted Shia Islam and sought to expand their influence into eastern Anatolia, where many Turkoman tribes were receptive to their message. This rivalry introduced a sectarian dimension to regional politics and threatened Ottoman stability.
That leadership emerged with the accession of Selim I in 1512. Known as Yavuz, or the Grim, Selim I was a formidable and uncompromising ruler whose short reign dramatically reshaped the Ottoman Empire. Selim moved swiftly to eliminate internal rivals and assert central authority, demonstrating a ruthless determination that contrasted sharply with his father's cautious style. His reign marked a decisive shift toward aggressive expansion and imperial dominance. Selim's first major challenge was the Safavid threat. In 1514, he led the Ottoman army eastward and confronted Shah Ismail of Persia at the Battle of Chaldiran. The Ottomans' use of firearms and artillery proved decisive against the Safavid cavalry, resulting in a crushing victory. This battle not only secured eastern Anatolia for the Ottomans, but also established the empire as the dominant Sunni power in the Islamic world. The defeat of the Safavids limited their expansion and solidified a sectarian boundary that would shape Middle Eastern politics for centuries. Following Chaldiran, Selim turned his attention southward toward the Mamluk Sultanate, which controlled Syria, Egypt, and the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. The Mamluks, though powerful, relied on traditional cavalry forces and were slow to adopt gunpowder weapons. In a series of campaigns between 1516 and 1517, Selim defeated the Mamluks at the battles of Marj Dabik and Redanya, leading to the rapid collapse of their state. The conquest of the Mamluk territories was one of the most significant achievements in Ottoman history. With the annexation of Syria, Egypt, and the Hejaz, the Ottomans gained control over the eastern Mediterranean, the Red Sea trade routes, and the heartlands of the Arab Islamic world. Most importantly, Selim assumed the title of Caliph, positioning the Ottoman Sultan as the spiritual as well as political leader of Sunni Islam. This development greatly enhanced Ottoman legitimacy and influence across the Muslim world. The incorporation of Arab lands required careful administration. Rather than dismantling existing structures, the Ottomans preserved many local institutions and elites, integrating them into the imperial system. This pragmatic approach ensured stability and facilitated the flow of tax revenue and resources to the central government. Cairo emerged as a major provincial capital, while Istanbul solidified its role as the empire's political and cultural center. Selim I's reign, though brief, transformed the Ottoman Empire into a global power. By the time of his death in 1520, the empire spanned 3 continents and controlled some of the most strategically and economically important regions of the world. His conquests laid the groundwork for further expansion and set the stage for the empire's golden age under his successor. That successor was Suleiman I, known to the West as the Magnificent and to the Islamic world as the Lawgiver. Suleiman inherited a vast and powerful empire and ruled it for nearly half a century, overseeing its greatest territorial expansion and cultural flowering. Under Suleiman, the Ottomans reached the height of their military, political, and artistic achievements. Suleiman continued the expansionist policies of his predecessors, launching campaigns into Europe, the Mediterranean, and the Middle East. His conquest of Belgrade in 1521 and victory over Hungary at the Battle of Mohacs in 1526 shattered the medieval kingdom of Hungary and opened Central Europe to Ottoman influence. These victories established the Ottomans as the dominant power in southeastern and central Europe, forcing European states to adapt to a new balance of power. At sea, the Ottoman navy reached unprecedented strength under the leadership of admirals like Hayreddin Barbarossa. Ottoman fleets challenged Spanish and Venetian power, securing control over much of the eastern and central Mediterranean. The Ottomans also expanded their influence along the North African coast, incorporating regions like Algeria and Tunisia into the imperial system. Maritime dominance allowed the empire to protect trade routes and project power far beyond its borders. Internally, Suleiman is remembered for his legal and administrative reforms. He systematized Ottoman law, harmonizing Islamic principles with imperial regulations to create a coherent legal framework that governed every aspect of life. These reforms earned him the title the Lawgiver and contributed to the empire's long-term stability. Suleiman also supported education, architecture, and the arts, commissioning grand mosques, bridges, and public works that symbolized imperial power and piety. The cultural achievements of this period were extraordinary. Ottoman architecture reached new heights under the master architect Sinan, whose works, including the Süleymaniye Mosque in Istanbul, embodied the empire's confidence and sophistication. Literature, calligraphy, and miniature painting flourished, reflecting a vibrant court culture that blended diverse traditions into a distinctive Ottoman style. By the mid-15th century, the Ottoman Empire stood at the center of global affairs. It controlled key land and sea routes, influenced political developments across Europe and the Middle East, and served as a hub of cultural and economic exchange. The empire's rise during this period was the result of strong leadership, military innovation, administrative efficiency, and a pragmatic approach to diversity. In conclusion, Part 4 of the Ottoman Empire's rise illustrates how the Ottomans achieved global supremacy by combining conquest with consolidation and cultural integration. From the cautious stabilization under Bayezid II to the dramatic expansions of Selim I and the golden age of Suleiman the Magnificent, this era represents the culmination of centuries of growth and adaptation. The Ottoman Empire emerged not only as a dominant military power, but also as a sophisticated and enduring civilization whose influence would shape world history for generations.
The fifth phase of the Ottoman Empire's rise represents the moment when imperial power matured into sustained dominance and global influence. Having reached its territorial, military, and cultural zenith under Suleiman the Magnificent, the Ottoman Empire in the mid to late 16th century stood as one of the most powerful states in the world. This period was not defined solely by conquest, but by the refinement of imperial institutions, the balancing of vast diversity, and the challenges of governing an empire that spanned 3 continents. Part 5 explores how the Ottomans maintained their supremacy, managed internal complexities, and adapted to a rapidly changing global order. After the death of Suleiman I in 1566, the Ottoman Empire entered a new phase, often described as an era of consolidation rather than expansion. Suleiman's successors inherited an empire of immense size and complexity, stretching from Hungary to Yemen and from Algeria to the Persian frontier. The challenge was no longer how to conquer new lands, but how to govern existing ones effectively. The administrative systems developed during the empire's rise now became essential to its survival and continued strength. One of the most important features of Ottoman stability during this period was the strength of its bureaucratic institutions. The Imperial Council, or Divan, played a central role in governance, overseeing military affairs, finance, justice, and diplomacy. Grand viziers, often chosen from the Devshirme system, wielded immense authority and ensured continuity even when sultans were less active in daily administration. This professional bureaucracy allowed the empire to function efficiently across vast distances and diverse regions. The legal system remained a cornerstone of Ottoman governance. The balance between Islamic law, Sharia, and Sultanic law, Kanun, provided both moral legitimacy and practical flexibility. Judges, qadis, administered justice at the local level, ensuring consistency while adapting to regional customs. This legal pluralism helped integrate different religious and ethnic communities into the imperial framework, reinforcing loyalty and stability. Economically, the Ottoman Empire benefited from its strategic position at the crossroads of global trade.
control over major land routes connecting Europe and Asia, as well as key maritime corridors in the Mediterranean, Red Sea, and Black Sea, generated substantial revenue. Ottoman cities such as Istanbul, Cairo, Damascus, and Aleppo became thriving commercial centers where merchants from Europe, Asia, and Africa exchanged goods, ideas, and technologies. State policies encouraged trade by protecting caravans, regulating markets, and maintaining infrastructure. The Timar system continued to underpin the Ottoman military and economic order. By granting land revenues to cavalry officers in exchange for service, the state ensured a steady supply of troops while maintaining agricultural productivity. However, as warfare evolved and firearms became increasingly important, the traditional Timar-based cavalry gradually lost prominence. The growing importance of salaried infantry, especially the Janissaries, reflected broader changes in military organization across the early modern world. The Janissaries themselves became both a symbol of Ottoman strength and a source of future tension. Originally an elite, disciplined force loyal solely to the Sultan, they played a decisive role in maintaining imperial power. Over time, however, their numbers increased, discipline declined, and political influence grew. By the late 16th century, Janissaries were increasingly involved in palace politics and urban life, foreshadowing challenges that would later affect the empire's stability. Naval power remained a key component of Ottoman supremacy. Throughout the 16th century, the Ottoman navy dominated much of the eastern Mediterranean and challenged European powers such as Spain and Venice. Although the Christian victory at the Battle of Lepanto in 1571 dealt a symbolic blow to Ottoman naval prestige, it did not fundamentally alter the balance of power. The Ottomans rebuilt their fleet rapidly, demonstrating the resilience of their military-industrial capacity and their ability to recover from setbacks. Diplomatically, the Ottomans were deeply embedded in European politics. They formed alliances with states such as France, exploiting rivalries among Christian powers to their advantage. These alliances were based on pragmatic interests rather than religious considerations, reflecting the empire's sophisticated understanding of international relations. Ottoman ambassadors and European envoys engaged in regular diplomacy, making the empire an integral part of the emerging global state system. Culturally, this period witnessed the continued flourishing of Ottoman art, literature, and architecture. Imperial patronage supported poets, scholars, and artists who contributed to a rich cultural life centered in Istanbul but extending throughout the empire. Educational institutions such as madrasas produced scholars trained in theology, law, and science, while craftsmen and architects refined a distinctive Ottoman aesthetic that blended Islamic, Byzantine, and local traditions. Religious diversity remained a defining feature of Ottoman society. The millet system allowed Christian and Jewish communities to govern their own religious and legal affairs under the supervision of the state. This arrangement fostered coexistence and minimized unrest, even as religious tensions intensified elsewhere in Europe during the Reformation and Counter-Reformation. The Ottomans' pragmatic tolerance enhanced their reputation as stable rulers of a multi-faith empire. Despite these strengths, the late 16th century also revealed emerging challenges. Population growth, inflation driven by the influx of New World silver, and changing patterns of trade placed pressure on the Ottoman economy. Traditional systems of taxation and landholding struggled to adapt to these shifts, leading to social unrest in some regions. Rebellions, particularly in Anatolia, highlighted the difficulties of managing a vast empire in a rapidly changing world. The role of the Sultan also evolved during this period. While early rulers like Mehmed II and Sulayman I personally led armies and directed policy, later sultans increasingly delegated authority to grand viziers and court officials. This shift did not necessarily weaken the state. as capable administrators often ensured effective governance. However, it did alter the symbolic and practical nature of imperial leadership, contributing to debates among historians about continuity and change in Ottoman power. Globally, the Ottoman Empire remained a central actor in the early modern world. Its rivalry with the Habsburgs shaped European politics, while its presence in the Middle East influenced relations with Persia and the Indian Ocean world. Ottoman control of the holy cities of Mecca and Medina reinforced its religious authority, attracting pilgrims and scholars from across the Islamic world and strengthening its claim to leadership within Sunni Islam. By the end of the 16th century, the Ottoman Empire had completed its rise from a frontier principality to a mature world empire. Its institutions were robust, its culture vibrant, and its influence far-reaching. Although signs of strain were beginning to appear, the empire remained a formidable power, capable of adapting to new circumstances. The foundations laid during this period would support Ottoman resilience for centuries, even as the nature of global power continued to evolve. In conclusion, Part 5 of the Ottoman Empire's rise highlights the transition from expansion to endurance. The Ottomans demonstrated that empire building was not only about conquest, but about governance, adaptation, and integration. Through strong institutions, pragmatic policies, and cultural vitality, they sustained their dominance in a changing world. This phase represents the culmination of the Ottoman rise, when imperial power was not merely achieved, but maintained, shaping the course of world history well into the modern era.
The sixth phase of the Ottoman Empire's rise focuses on endurance, adaptation, and transformation in the face of internal pressures and an evolving global environment. By the late 16th and early 17th centuries, the Ottomans were no longer a rapidly expanding power, yet they remained one of the most influential empires on earth. This period demonstrates that the Ottoman rise was not a simple upward curve ending with conquest, but a long process in which survival, reform, and flexibility were just as important as military victories. Part 6 explores how the empire responded to economic change, military evolution, political restructuring, and global shifts while maintaining its imperial stature. As the 17th century began, the Ottoman Empire governed a vast and diverse population spread across 3 continents. Such scale brought immense administrative challenges. Communication across long distances was slow, local conditions varied greatly, and regional elites often sought greater autonomy. Yet the Ottomans managed to preserve unity through a layered system of governance that balanced central authority with local administration. Provincial governors, judges, and military commanders acted as representatives of the Sultan, ensuring imperial law and order while adapting policies to regional realities. One of the most significant transformations of this era involved the Ottoman economy. The empire was deeply affected by global economic changes, particularly the influx of silver from the Americas into Europe and the Mediterranean world. This influx caused widespread inflation, reducing the real value of state revenues and salaries. Fixed incomes, especially those of soldiers and officials, lost purchasing power, leading to discontent and instability. The Ottomans were not unique in facing this crisis, but its impact forced them to reconsider long-standing fiscal practices. In response to economic strain, the Ottoman state gradually moved away from the traditional Timar system. As cavalry-based warfare declined in importance and cash-based armies became more common, land-for-service arrangements proved less effective. The state increasingly relied on tax farming, known as the iltizam system, in which individuals paid the government for the right to collect taxes in a given area. While this system provided immediate revenue, it also empowered local elites and sometimes led to abuses, altering the balance between the center and the provinces. Military change was another defining feature of this period.
Firearms and artillery had already transformed warfare during the empire's rise, but by the 17th century, European armies were undergoing rapid professionalization and technological advancement. The Ottomans, though still formidable, faced growing competition from well-organized European states. Maintaining military parity required constant investment, reform, and adaptation, placing further strain on state finances. The Janissaries, once the backbone of Ottoman military power, became increasingly complex figures in this era. Their role expanded beyond the battlefield into urban society, trade, and politics. While they remained influential and often effective, their growing numbers and political involvement sometimes undermined discipline and reform efforts. Nevertheless, it is important to recognize that the Janissaries were not simply a force of decline. They were also a stabilizing element that helped preserve the empire during times of weak leadership. Political authority within the Ottoman state also evolved. The role of the Sultan changed significantly compared to the era of Mehmed II or Suleiman I. Some sultans ruled actively and decisively, while others remained distant from daily governance. In this context, the office of the Grand Vizier became increasingly powerful. Strong Grand Viziers, supported by experienced bureaucrats, often provided effective leadership and continuity, demonstrating the resilience of Ottoman institutions beyond individual rulers. The 17th century also witnessed periods of internal unrest, most notably the Chalali rebellions in Anatolia. These uprisings were driven by economic hardship, population pressure, and the disruption of traditional systems of land and military service. Although destructive, the rebellions did not lead to the collapse of the empire. Instead, they forced the state to respond with military action, administrative reform, and negotiated settlements, illustrating the Ottomans' capacity to absorb and survive internal crises. Diplomacy became increasingly important during this phase of the Ottoman rise. The empire was deeply involved in European power politics, particularly in its long rivalry with the Habsburgs. Wars in Hungary and the Balkans were costly, but also demonstrated that the Ottomans remained a central player in continental affairs. Treaties and negotiations reflected a growing recognition of diplomatic norms, signaling the Ottomans' integration into an emerging international system based on balance of power. At the same time, the Ottomans maintained their influence in the Islamic world. Control of Mecca and Medina reinforced their religious authority, while connections with North Africa, the Red Sea, and the Indian Ocean sustained economic and strategic interests. Although Portuguese and later Dutch and English naval power challenged Ottoman dominance in long-distance trade, the empire continued to play a key role in regional commerce and pilgrimage networks. Culturally and intellectually, this period was far from stagnant. Ottoman scholars, poets, and historians produced works that reflected both continuity and change. Education remained centered on madrasas, where religious and legal studies dominated, but there was also engagement with science, geography, and history. Ottoman chroniclers carefully documented events, providing rich sources for understanding how the empire viewed itself during this era of transformation. Urban life flourished in many parts of the empire. Cities such as Istanbul, Cairo, Damascus, and Baghdad remained centers of trade, craftsmanship, and learning. Public works, such as mosques, markets, fountains, and bridges, continued to shape urban landscapes. These projects were often funded by charitable endowments known as waqf, which played a crucial role in social welfare and economic life, demonstrating the enduring strength of Ottoman civil institutions. Women of the imperial court also gained greater visibility and influence during this period. This era is sometimes referred to as the Sultanate of Women, reflecting the political roles played by royal mothers and consorts. While this phenomenon has often been portrayed negatively, modern historians emphasize that it represented another form of adaptation within the imperial system, ensuring continuity during times of weak or young sultans. From a broader perspective, the Ottoman experience in this period challenges simplistic narratives of rise and decline. While expansion slowed and pressures increased, the empire did not collapse or lose its relevance. Instead, it adjusted to new realities, restructured its institutions, and remained a major power well into the 18th century. The ability to endure crisis itself was a product of the strong foundations laid during the earlier phases of the empire's rise. By the end of the 17th century, the Ottoman Empire had clearly entered a new stage of its history. It was no longer defined primarily by conquest, but by governance, diplomacy, and reform. Yet this phase should still be understood as part of the Ottoman rise because it demonstrates how imperial power was sustained over time. Longevity, not just expansion, was one of the Ottomans' greatest achievements. In conclusion, Part 6 of the Ottoman Empire's rise highlights the importance of resilience and adaptation in imperial history. Faced with economic change, military competition, and internal unrest, the Ottomans did not simply decline, they responded creatively and pragmatically. Through institutional flexibility, diplomatic engagement, and social integration, the empire preserved its strength and influence in a changing world. This period reveals that the true measure of the Ottoman rise lies not only in how the empire expanded, but in how it endured, evolved, and continued to shape global history for centuries.
The seventh phase of the Ottoman Empire's rise can best be understood as an era of reform, recalibration, and renewed assertion of imperial relevance. By the late 17th and early 18th centuries, the Ottomans were operating in a world that had changed dramatically from the one in which their empire was born. European states were becoming more centralized, technologically advanced, and economically dynamic, while global trade routes increasingly shifted toward the Atlantic. Yet the Ottoman Empire did not simply fade into irrelevance. Instead, it entered a long and complex process of adaptation that allowed it to remain a major power for generations. Part 7 examines how the Ottomans responded to military setbacks, administrative challenges, and intellectual change while continuing the legacy of their imperial rise. A critical turning point in this phase was the series of wars fought against European powers in the late 17th century, culminating in the Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699. For the first time, the Ottomans were forced to accept significant territorial losses through formal diplomatic agreement, particularly in Central Europe. While this moment is often portrayed as the beginning of irreversible decline, it is more accurately understood as a transition. The empire's leadership recognized that traditional methods of warfare and governance were no longer sufficient, prompting a reassessment of imperial strategy. The Treaty of Karlowitz marked a shift in Ottoman diplomatic practice. Previously, the Ottomans had largely dictated terms as victors. Now they were engaging in negotiations on more equal footing with European states. This change reflected the emergence of a new international order based on balance of power and permanent diplomacy. Ottoman officials adapted by professionalizing diplomacy, establishing permanent embassies, and studying European political systems more closely. Rather than signaling weakness, this diplomatic evolution demonstrated the empire's capacity to learn and adjust. Military reform became a central concern during this period. Ottoman leaders increasingly understood that European armies had surpassed them in organization, training, and technology. Artillery, infantry tactics, and logistical systems were evolving rapidly in Europe, and the Ottomans sought to keep pace. While reform efforts faced resistance from entrenched interests, particularly within the Janissary Corps, they nonetheless reflected a growing awareness that imperial survival depended on modernization rather than tradition alone. The 18th century witnessed repeated attempts to restructure the Ottoman military. New units trained along European lines were introduced, and foreign experts were sometimes invited to assist with training and engineering. Although progress was uneven, these reforms laid the groundwork for more comprehensive transformations in later centuries. Importantly, they reveal that the Ottomans were not isolated from global developments, but actively engaged with them. Administrative reform accompanied military change. The central government sought to improve tax collection, reduce corruption, and strengthen control over provincial governors. The growing power of local notables, known as ayan, posed a challenge to imperial authority, particularly in the provinces. Rather than attempting outright suppression, the Ottoman state often chose negotiation and incorporation, granting these figures official recognition in exchange for loyalty. This pragmatic approach preserved stability and ensured the continued flow of revenue and manpower. Economic adaptation was equally crucial. While the empire faced competition from European merchants and shifting trade routes, it remained a vital economic space connecting Europe, Asia, and Africa. Ottoman markets continued to thrive, supported by agricultural production, regional trade, and urban craftsmanship. The state encouraged economic activity through infrastructure maintenance, regulation of markets, and protection of trade routes, demonstrating that economic resilience was a key component of imperial endurance. Culturally, this period was marked by increased curiosity about Europe and the wider world. Ottoman intellectuals, diplomats, and travelers began to observe European societies more closely, documenting their institutions, technologies, and customs. These encounters did not lead to blind imitation, but encouraged selective borrowing. The Ottomans sought to adopt what they found useful while preserving their own traditions and identity, reflecting a confident yet flexible imperial culture. One notable manifestation of this cultural openness was the tulip era in the early 18th century. This period, associated with relative peace and prosperity, saw increased patronage of art, architecture, and leisure culture. Gardens, palaces, and public spaces flourished, symbolizing refinement and stability. While later criticized as indulgent, the tulip era also represented a moment of experimentation and engagement with new ideas, including printing, diplomacy, and urban planning. The introduction of the printing press into the Ottoman world, though delayed compared to Europe, was another significant development. While religious concerns initially limited its use, printed materials eventually contributed to the spread of knowledge and administrative efficiency. This cautious adoption reflects the broader Ottoman approach to change, gradual, negotiated, and shaped by social realities rather than imposed abruptly. Religious and social structures continued to provide cohesion during this period of transition. The millet system remained a cornerstone of Ottoman governance, allowing diverse communities to coexist under imperial rule. Religious institutions, charitable endowments, and local networks played essential roles in education, welfare, and social order. These structures helped mitigate the disruptive effects of reform and change, reinforcing social stability. Women continued to play influential roles within the imperial household and elite society. Although the Sultanate of Women had peaked earlier, royal women remained active patrons of architecture, charity, and politics. Their involvement highlights the complexity of Ottoman power structures and the multiple channels through which authority and influence were exercised. From a global perspective, the Ottoman Empire remained deeply interconnected with world affairs. Its rivalry with Russia intensified, shaping politics in Eastern Europe and the Black Sea region. At the same time, relations with Western Europe evolved from primarily military confrontation to a mixture of competition, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. The empire's position between continents ensured that it remained a central player in global history. Perhaps the most important lesson of this phase of the Ottoman rise is the concept of longevity. While many empires of the early modern world rose and fell rapidly, the Ottomans demonstrated an extraordinary ability to endure. This endurance was not accidental. It was the result of institutional depth, administrative flexibility, and a willingness to confront change rather than deny it. The empire's leaders understood that power in a changing world required adaptation as much as strength. By the mid-18th century, the Ottoman Empire had clearly entered a new historical stage. It was no longer expanding dramatically, but it was reforming, negotiating, and redefining its role in the world. These processes should not be seen as signs of failure, but as evidence of a mature empire grappling with modernity on its own terms. In conclusion, Part 7 of the Ottoman Empire's rise emphasizes transformation rather than conquest. Faced with military setbacks and global change, the Ottomans chose adaptation over collapse. Through diplomatic innovation, administrative reform, cultural engagement, and economic resilience, they sustained their imperial legacy. This phase demonstrates that the Ottoman rise was not merely a story of expansion, but a long historical journey defined by survival, reinvention, and enduring influence. The empire's ability to adjust to new realities ensured that it would remain a significant force in world history well beyond the age of its greatest conquests.
The eighth phase of the Ottoman Empire's rise can be understood as the age of deep reform, intellectual awakening, and strategic reorientation in response to modern challenges. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, the Ottomans were confronting a rapidly transforming world shaped by industrialization, nationalism, scientific progress, and European imperial expansion. Yet even in this era of pressure and uncertainty, the Ottoman story was not merely one of decline. Instead, it was a continuation of the empire's long rise in a different form, one defined by institutional reform, ideological change, and the struggle to redefine sovereignty and identity in the modern age. The geopolitical environment surrounding the Ottoman Empire had changed dramatically. European powers such as Britain, France, Austria, and Russia had developed advanced military technologies, centralized administrations, and global colonial networks. The Ottomans increasingly faced military defeats, territorial losses, and diplomatic constraints. However, these challenges also forced Ottoman leaders to confront the limits of traditional systems and to seek new paths forward. The empire's response marked one of the most ambitious reform efforts in pre-modern and early modern history. A major catalyst for reform was the growing threat from Russia. Throughout the 18th century, Russia expanded southward, challenging Ottoman control of the Black Sea and the Balkans. Repeated wars exposed weaknesses in Ottoman military organization, logistics, and technology. The loss of Crimea in 1774 was particularly significant, as it undermined Ottoman prestige and demonstrated that the empire could no longer rely on past strengths alone. This moment deeply influenced Ottoman political thinking and reinforced the urgency of reform. The reign of Sultan Selim III stands at the center of this transformative period. Selim III was among the first Ottoman rulers to fully recognize that survival required systematic modernization rather than piecemeal adjustment. He launched the Nizam-e-Jadid, or New Order, a comprehensive reform program aimed primarily at the military, but extending into finance, diplomacy, and education. The goal was not to abandon Ottoman traditions, but to strengthen them by incorporating effective European practices. Under the Nizam-e-Jadid, Selim III established a new army trained and equipped along European lines. This force operated alongside traditional units, but followed modern drills, discipline, and command structures. To support it, Selim introduced new taxes and financial institutions, challenging entrenched interests that benefited from the old system. These reforms reflected a fundamental shift in Ottoman governance, the recognition that change had to be institutional, not merely personal or symbolic. Diplomacy also underwent significant transformation during this period. the Ottomans expanded their network of permanent embassies in European capitals, allowing them to observe political, military, and cultural developments firsthand. Ottoman diplomats produced detailed reports analyzing European societies, technologies, and statecraft. These observations fed into reform debates at home, contributing to a growing body of knowledge about the modern world and the empire's place within it. Despite its ambition, Selim III's reform program faced fierce resistance. Traditional military groups, particularly the Janissaries, viewed the New Order army as a threat to their privileges and status. Religious conservatives and local elites also opposed reforms that disrupted established power structures. In 1807, a revolt led to Selim's deposition and eventual death, highlighting the dangers faced by reformers in a deeply traditional society. Yet even in failure, Selim's efforts left a lasting legacy by demonstrating that comprehensive reform was both necessary and possible. The reformist impulse continued under Mahmud II, one of the most consequential sultans in Ottoman history. Mahmud II approached reform with determination and patience, learning from the failures of his predecessors. He understood that meaningful change required the removal of institutional obstacles, even at great cost. His most dramatic act came in 1826 with the destruction of the Janissary Corps in an event known as the Auspicious Incident. This decisive move eliminated a powerful source of resistance and opened the way to deeper transformation. Following the elimination of the Janissaries, Mahmud II reorganized the Ottoman military on modern lines, establishing new infantry units, military academies, and training systems. Uniforms, ranks, and command structures were standardized, symbolizing a new vision of state authority. These reforms extended beyond the army, reshaping the bureaucracy, taxation, and provincial administration. Mahmud II sought to centralize power, reduce the autonomy of local elites, and reinforce the authority of the central government. Education became a crucial pillar of reform during this period. New schools were established to train military officers, administrators, and technical specialists. These institutions emphasized mathematics, engineering, medicine, and foreign languages, reflecting the practical needs of a modern state. While traditional religious education remained important, the expansion of secular learning marked a significant shift in Ottoman intellectual life and prepared a new generation of reform-minded officials. Cultural and symbolic changes accompanied institutional reform. Mahmud II introduced new styles of dress for officials, replacing traditional garments with uniforms inspired by European models. This change was not merely cosmetic, it represented a redefinition of identity and authority. The state increasingly presented itself as a centralized, rational, and modern entity, capable of commanding loyalty through law and administration rather than tradition alone. The Ottoman Empire's reform efforts reached a new stage with the proclamation of the Tanzimat reforms in 1839. Although extending beyond Mahmud II's reign, the Tanzimat represented the culmination of decades of reformist thinking. These reforms aimed to guarantee security of life, property, and honor for all subjects, regardless of religion. They sought to standardize taxation, reform the legal system, and create equality before the law. In doing so, the Ottomans attempted to redefine the relationship between state and subject in a modern sense. The Tanzimat era reflected a profound shift in imperial ideology. The Ottoman state increasingly emphasized the concept of Ottoman citizenship, seeking to unite diverse populations under a shared legal and political framework. This vision was both ambitious and fragile, as it had to balance the empire's deep religious and cultural diversity with the demands of modern governance. Nevertheless, it demonstrated the empire's continued capacity for innovation and reinvention. Economic reform was another key focus of this period. The Ottomans faced growing integration into the global capitalist economy, which brought both opportunities and vulnerabilities. European trade agreements increased commerce, but also exposed local industries to competition. Reformers sought to modernize infrastructure, improve transportation, and rationalize taxation to strengthen the empire's economic foundations. Railways, ports, and telegraph lines gradually transformed communication and trade, linking distant regions more closely to the center. Social change accompanied these economic and political transformations. Urban populations grew, new professional classes emerged, and ideas about rights, governance, and identity began to circulate more widely. These developments reflected the empire's engagement with global modernity and its effort to shape change rather than be overwhelmed by it. From a broader historical perspective, this phase of the Ottoman rise illustrates the complexity of imperial adaptation. Unlike many empires that collapsed under the weight of modernization, the Ottomans actively sought to reform themselves from within. Their efforts were uneven, contested, and sometimes contradictory, but they represented one of the most sustained attempts at state-led modernization in world history. The significance of this period lies not only in its reforms, but in its mindset. Ottoman leaders increasingly viewed change as a permanent condition, rather than a temporary crisis. This recognition marked a departure from earlier eras and reflected a mature understanding of global transformation. The empire's willingness to learn from rivals, adopt new institutions, and rethink its identity underscores the depth of its historical resilience. By the mid-19th century, the Ottoman Empire had been fundamentally reshaped. While it continued to face immense challenges, it remained a sovereign state with functioning institutions, a reformist elite, and a vision, however contested, of modernization and unity. This endurance was itself a continuation of the Ottoman rise, demonstrating that power could be sustained not only through conquest, but through reform, adaptation.
The eighth stage of the Ottoman Empire's rise represents a profound redefinition of power, identity, and governance in the face of modern global change. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, the Ottomans were confronting pressures unlike any they had faced before. Industrialization in Europe, the rise of nationalism, scientific advancement, and aggressive imperial expansion by Western powers challenged the foundations of traditional empires. Yet the Ottoman response to these challenges was not passive decline, but a determined effort to reform, modernize, and preserve sovereignty. This phase of the Ottoman rise is best understood as an age of transformation, in which survival itself became a form of strength. The international environment surrounding the Ottoman Empire had shifted dramatically. European states had developed standing armies, equipped with advanced firearms, efficient bureaucracies, and expanding economies driven by industry and global trade. The Ottomans, once the dominant military power of Europe and the Middle East, now faced repeated defeats and diplomatic pressure. Wars with Russia, Austria, and other European powers exposed weaknesses in military organization, logistics, and technology. These setbacks forced Ottoman leaders to confront a difficult reality. The methods that had once ensured success were no longer sufficient. One of the critical challenges came from Russia, whose expansion toward the Black Sea directly threatened Ottoman territorial integrity. The Russo-Ottoman Wars of the 18th century revealed the empire's vulnerability and culminated in humiliating treaties that reduced Ottoman influence. The loss of Crimea was especially traumatic, as it represented not only a strategic defeat, but also a symbolic blow to Ottoman prestige and Islamic authority. These events deeply influenced Ottoman political thought and created a sense of urgency among reform-minded elites. Amid this atmosphere of crisis emerged Sultan Selim III, a ruler whose vision marked a turning point in Ottoman history. Selim III understood that the empire could not survive without fundamental reform.
Unlike earlier rulers who relied on limited or temporary adjustments, Selim sought comprehensive change through the Nizam-i-Jadid, or New Order. This reform program aimed to modernize the military, reorganize finances, and reshape diplomacy, signaling a clear break from traditional approaches. The centerpiece of the Nizam-i-Jadid was the creation of a new, modern army trained according to European standards. This force was disciplined, uniformed, and equipped with modern weapons, operating alongside but separate from traditional units. To support it, Selim III introduced new financial measures, including revised taxation and centralized revenue collection. These reforms challenged powerful interest groups, particularly the Janissaries and conservative elites, who viewed change as a threat to their status and privileges. Diplomatic reform was another crucial element of Selim III's vision. The Ottomans expanded their permanent diplomatic missions in European capitals, allowing them to observe foreign military systems, political institutions, and cultural practices firsthand. Reports from Ottoman ambassadors reveal a growing awareness of European strength and a desire to learn selectively from it. This engagement with Europe marked a significant shift in Ottoman attitudes, replacing isolation with informed interaction. Despite its ambition, the Nizam-i-Jadid faced fierce resistance. The Janissaries, whose influence had grown over centuries, opposed reforms that undermined their authority. Religious conservatives feared that European-inspired changes threatened Islamic tradition. In 1807, these tensions erupted into rebellion, leading to Selim III's overthrow and death. Although tragic, this failure did not end the reform movement. Instead, it demonstrated the depth of resistance reformers faced and the need for stronger, more decisive leadership. That leadership emerged with Sultan Mahmud II, one of the most transformative figures in Ottoman history. Mahmud II recognized that reform could not succeed while entrenched institutions blocked change. His reign was patience, strategic calculation, and ultimately decisive action. In 1826, he destroyed the Janissary Corps in a dramatic event known as the Auspicious Incident. This act removed a major obstacle to modernization and reshaped the balance of power within the empire. Following the elimination of the Janissaries, Mahmud II launched sweeping reforms across the military and administration. A new army was established, with standardized training, ranks, and uniforms. Military academies were founded to educate officers in modern tactics, engineering, and science. These changes reflected a new understanding of warfare as a professional and technical endeavor rather than a traditional or feudal activity. Administrative reform accompanied military modernization. Mahmud II sought to centralize authority, reduce the power of provincial elites, and strengthen the bureaucracy. Ministries were reorganized, record-keeping improved, and officials increasingly received salaries rather than relying on land revenues. These reforms aimed to create a more rational and efficient state, capable of governing a diverse population and responding to modern challenges. Education became a central pillar of transformation during this period. New schools trained civil servants, doctors, engineers, and military officers in subjects such as mathematics, medicine, and foreign languages. While religious education remained important, the expansion of secular learning represented a major shift in Ottoman intellectual life. This new educational system produced a generation of reform-minded officials who would shape the empire's future. Symbolic changes reinforced these institutional reforms. Mahmud II introduced new styles of dress for officials, replacing traditional robes with uniforms inspired by European models. These changes were controversial but significant, signaling a redefinition of authority and identity. The Ottoman state increasingly presented itself as a modern, centralized power rather than a traditional empire rooted solely in custom and religion. The reformist momentum continued after Mahmud II's death with the proclamation of the Tanzimat reforms in 1839.
These reforms sought to reorganize the empire on principles of legal equality, security, and centralized administration. The Tanzimat aimed to guarantee the rights of all subjects, regardless of religion, and to modernize taxation, law, and military service. This represented a radical rethinking of the relationship between ruler and ruled, introducing concepts associated with modern citizenship. The Tanzimat era reflected the Ottomans' attempt to reconcile imperial tradition with modern governance. The state promoted the idea of Ottomanism, emphasizing shared loyalty to the empire rather than religious or ethnic identity. While this vision faced significant challenges, particularly from rising nationalist movements, it demonstrated the empire's willingness to innovate ideologically as well as institutionally. Economic reform was another critical aspect of this period. Integration into the global economy brought increased trade, but also competition from European industries. Ottoman reformers sought to modernize infrastructure, improve transportation, and rationalize taxation. Railways, ports, and telegraph lines gradually transformed communication and commerce, linking distant provinces more closely to the imperial center. Social and cultural change accompanied these reforms. Urban centers expanded, new professional classes emerged, and intellectual life became more dynamic. Newspapers, translations, and debates introduced new ideas about governance, rights, and society. While these developments sometimes challenged traditional authority, they also contributed to a more informed and engaged population, strengthening the empire's capacity for reform. From a broader historical perspective, this phase of the Ottoman rise illustrates the empire's remarkable adaptability. Unlike many empires that collapsed when confronted with modernity, the Ottomans actively sought to reform themselves from within. Their efforts were imperfect and contested, but they reflected a deep commitment to preserving sovereignty and relevance in a changing world. By the mid-19th century, the Ottoman Empire had been fundamentally transformed. Though still facing external pressure and internal tension, it remained a functioning state with modern institutions, a reformist elite, and a vision of renewal. This endurance was not accidental, but the result of deliberate choices and sustained effort. In conclusion, Part 8 of the Ottoman Empire's rise highlights transformation as a form of strength. Faced with unprecedented challenges, the Ottomans did not surrender to decline, but pursued reform, modernization, and intellectual renewal. Through the leadership of visionary rulers and the efforts of reform-minded officials, the empire redefined itself for the modern age. This phase demonstrates that the Ottoman rise was not only about conquest and expansion, but about resilience, reinvention, and the enduring pursuit of sovereignty in a rapidly changing world.
The ninth phase of the Ottoman Empire's rise must be understood as an age of ideological struggle, political experimentation, and institutional consolidation in the face of mounting internal and external pressures. By the mid to late 19th century, the empire had already embarked on an ambitious reform path through the Tanzimat, yet the results were mixed. While modern institutions had been introduced, the empire now faced a deeper challenge: how to create unity, legitimacy, and stability in a multi-ethnic, multi-religious state during an era dominated by nationalism, constitutionalism, and imperial rivalry. Part 9 explores how the Ottomans attempted to redefine sovereignty, authority, and identity while preserving imperial continuity. One of the most significant outcomes of the Tanzimat reforms was the emergence of a new political consciousness. Bureaucrats, intellectuals, journalists, and military officers educated in modern schools began to question not only administrative inefficiency, but also the nature of power itself. These reform-minded elites believed that laws, constitutions, and representative institutions were essential for the empire's survival. Their ideas were shaped by European political thought, Islamic reformism, and Ottoman traditions, creating a unique intellectual synthesis rather than simple imitation. The concept of Ottomanism remained central during this period. It aimed to create a shared civic identity among Muslims and non-Muslims alike, binding them through equal rights and loyalty to the state. Legal reforms attempted to institutionalize this idea by guaranteeing equality before the law, reforming courts, and standardizing taxation and military service. However, the practical implementation of equality proved difficult. Long-standing social hierarchies, communal divisions, and foreign interference often undermined these ideals. Foreign powers continued to exert enormous influence over Ottoman affairs. Britain, France, Russia, and Austria all sought strategic advantage, often presenting themselves as protectors of specific religious or ethnic groups within the empire. Capitulations granted economic privileges to Europeans, weakening Ottoman financial independence. While reforms aimed to strengthen sovereignty, they sometimes increased dependence on foreign loans, advisors, and trade networks, creating a paradox of modernization without full autonomy. Economic challenges became increasingly severe. The cost of reforms, military modernization, and infrastructure projects strained state finances. Revenue collection remained inefficient, and reliance on European loans led to mounting debt. By the 1870s, the empire faced a serious fiscal crisis that culminated in default. This financial dependency limited political freedom and exposed the empire to external control. Yet it also pushed reformers to seek more systematic economic governance. Amid these challenges, a new intellectual movement known as the Young Ottomans emerged. Composed of writers, poets, and officials, they criticized both conservative resistance and authoritarian reform from above. The Young Ottomans argued that true strength lay in constitutional government, rule of law, and public participation. They believed that Islamic principles were compatible with constitutionalism and that a representative system could unify the empire and restore legitimacy. The ideas of the Young Ottomans gained momentum during the reign of Sultan Abdulaziz, whose rule was marked by ambitious modernization projects, but also growing authoritarianism and financial mismanagement. Discontent spread among bureaucrats, military officers, and urban populations. In 1876, a political crisis led to Abdulaziz's deposition and death, signaling a dramatic shift in Ottoman politics and opening the door to constitutional change. The accession of Sultan Abdul Hamid II marked a turning point. Initially, Abdul Hamid appeared receptive to reformist demands. In the same year, the Ottoman Empire promulgated its first constitution, establishing a parliament and outlining basic rights for citizens. This moment represented the culmination of decades of reformist thought and was widely celebrated as a new beginning for the empire. However, the constitutional experiment faced immediate challenges. The Russo-Ottoman War of 1877 to 1878 proved disastrous, resulting in territorial losses and mass displacement. Abdul Hamid II used the crisis as justification to suspend the constitution and dissolve parliament, consolidating power in his own hands. While this move disappointed reformers, it did not signify a rejection of modernization. Instead, Abdul Hamid pursued a different strategy of centralized, controlled reform. Abdul Hamid II's reign was characterized by authoritarian governance combined with extensive modernization efforts. He strengthened the bureaucracy, expanded education, and invested in infrastructure such as railways, telegraphs, and public institutions. The famous Hijaz Railway symbolized both technological progress and Islamic unity, linking distant provinces to the imperial center and reinforcing the Sultan's role as caliph. Education played a particularly important role during this period. Schools multiplied across the empire, producing a new generation of officials, officers, and professionals. Curricula emphasized science, administration, and loyalty to the state. While censorship restricted political expression, intellectual life continued to evolve, often in subtle and indirect ways. Ironically, Abdul Hamid's educational reforms helped create the very groups that would later challenge his rule. Ideologically, Abdul Hamid promoted pan-Islamism as a unifying force. As caliph, he emphasized his role as leader of the global Muslim community, seeking to counter both European imperialism and internal fragmentation. This policy resonated with many Muslims within and beyond the empire, enhancing Ottoman diplomatic influence. However, it also alarmed European powers and did little to address the growing nationalist aspirations of non-Muslim populations. Nationalism increasingly challenged the Ottoman vision of unity. In the Balkans, ethnic and national movements gained strength, often supported by foreign powers. Revolts, wars, and diplomatic interventions gradually reduced Ottoman territory in Europe. Each loss weakened the empire's strategic position and psychological confidence, yet the state continued to adapt, reform, and reorganize rather than collapse outright. The tension between centralization and diversity became more pronounced. While the state sought uniform administration, local identities and grievances persisted. Reforms that appeared progressive in theory sometimes generated resistance in practice, particularly when they disrupted traditional power structures. Managing this balance became one of the empire's greatest challenges during this phase of its rise. Despite setbacks, the Ottoman state demonstrated remarkable resilience. Administrative efficiency improved, communication networks expanded, and the army became more professional. The empire increasingly functioned as a modern state rather than a medieval polity. This transformation was uneven and incomplete, but it reflected a sustained commitment to adaptation rather than stagnation. From a broader perspective, Part 9 illustrates that the Ottoman rise was not a simple upward trajectory of conquest, but a complex process of reinvention. Power was no longer measured solely by territory or military victories, but by institutional capacity, ideological legitimacy, and global engagement. The Ottomans were redefining what it meant to be an empire in the modern world. The legacy of this period is deeply significant. Constitutional ideas, centralized administration, modern education, and political activism laid the groundwork for future transformations. Even when reforms failed or were reversed, they left lasting institutional and intellectual imprints. The debates of this era continued to shape Ottoman politics into the 20th century. In conclusion, Part 9 of the Ottoman Empire's rise reveals an empire struggling not against inevitable decline, but against the complexities of modernity itself. Through constitutional experiments, ideological innovation, and authoritarian reform, the Ottomans sought to preserve unity and sovereignty in an age of unprecedented change.
The 10th phase of the Ottoman Empire's rise represents the final and most complex stage of transformation, where reform, resistance, nationalism, and global conflict converged to reshape the empire's destiny. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the Ottomans were no longer merely responding to European pressure. They were actively redefining statehood, identity, and power in a world dominated by nation-states and industrial empires. Part 10 explores how the empire navigated this turbulent era through renewed constitutionalism, revolutionary movements, and participation in global war, all while attempting to preserve imperial continuity. The suspension of the constitution by Sultan Abdul Hamid II did not extinguish constitutional ideals. Instead, opposition movements went underground or into exile, where they continued to debate and organize. Among these groups emerged the Young Turks, a diverse coalition of military officers, bureaucrats, intellectuals, and students who believed that the empire's survival depended on restoring constitutional rule. Their ideology combined Ottomanism,
Turkish nationalism, positivism, and modern political thought, reflecting the intellectual diversity of the late Ottoman world. The spread of modern education played a crucial role in shaping this new political generation. Military academies, medical schools, and civil institutions produced officers and professionals who were disciplined, scientifically trained, and politically aware. Exposure to European ideas through books, journals, and personal experience fostered a belief that rational governance and constitutional limits on power were essential. These individuals increasingly viewed authoritarian rule as an obstacle to progress rather than a source of stability. By the early 20th century, dissatisfaction with Abdul Hamid II's regime had intensified. While his rule had brought administrative order and infrastructural development, it relied heavily on surveillance, censorship, and centralized control. Economic difficulties, regional unrest, and military setbacks further weakened confidence in the regime. The empire's inability to prevent territorial losses, particularly in the Balkans, convinced many that fundamental political change was necessary. In 1908, this pressure culminated in the Young Turk Revolution. Army officers in Macedonia, fearing both foreign intervention and internal collapse, forced the restoration of the constitution. The re-establishment of parliament marked a dramatic turning point, reviving hopes for political participation, equality, and reform. Celebrations erupted across the empire as people of different religions and ethnicities expressed optimism about a shared future under constitutional rule. The Second Constitutional Period introduced a new political dynamic. Political parties, newspapers, and public debates flourished, creating an unprecedented level of civic engagement. The Committee of Union and Progress, CUP, the most influential Young Turk organization, emerged as a dominant force. Initially presenting itself as a guardian of constitutionalism, the CUP sought to centralize authority and modernize the state rapidly, believing that strong leadership was essential to prevent disintegration. However, constitutional politics proved deeply challenging. The empire's diversity, combined with economic hardship and foreign pressure, made consensus difficult. Non-Muslim communities increasingly pursued nationalist goals rather than Ottoman unity, while Muslim populations faced displacement and insecurity due to wars and territorial losses. These tensions strained the ideal of Ottomanism and pushed political discourse toward more exclusive identities. The counter-revolution of 1909 revealed the fragility of the new order. Conservative and religious groups, alarmed by rapid change, attempted to overthrow the constitutional regime. The revolt was suppressed by loyal army units, leading to the deposition of Abdul Hamid II. This event symbolized the definitive end of absolutist rule and confirmed the army's central role in Ottoman politics. Following 1909, the CUP gradually consolidated power, often at the expense of democratic pluralism. While elections continued, political opposition was increasingly marginalized. The leadership prioritized state survival through centralization, military reform, and economic nationalism. These policies reflected a belief that only a strong, unified state could withstand external threats and internal fragmentation. Foreign policy challenges soon overwhelmed domestic reform. The Italo-Turkish War of 1911 to 1912 resulted in the loss of Libya, exposing military weaknesses and encouraging further aggression. Shortly afterward, the Balkan Wars devastated the empire, stripping it of most of its European territories. Millions of Muslim refugees flooded into Anatolia, transforming the empire's demographic and social landscape. These losses profoundly shaped Ottoman political thinking, intensifying nationalism and a sense of existential crisis. The trauma of the Balkan Wars marked a psychological turning point. The empire's identity shifted increasingly toward Anatolia as its core,
and the leadership became more willing to pursue radical solutions. The CUP leadership, now dominated by a small group of powerful figures, believed that survival required decisive action, even at great moral and human cost. This mindset would have far-reaching consequences. As Europe moved toward war, the Ottoman Empire faced a critical choice. Isolated diplomatically and militarily vulnerable, Ottoman leaders sought an alliance that could guarantee survival. In 1914, the empire entered the First World War on the side of Germany and the Central Powers. This decision was driven by strategic calculation rather than ideological alignment, reflecting desperation as much as ambition. World War I became the ultimate test of the Ottoman state. The empire fought on multiple fronts, stretching its resources to the limit. While suffering severe losses, the Ottomans also achieved remarkable successes. The defense of Gallipoli demonstrated military resilience and effective leadership, boosting morale and international reputation. Campaigns in the Caucasus, Mesopotamia, and Arabia revealed both the strengths and weaknesses of the reformed army. War intensified internal tensions. Economic hardship, food shortages, and population displacement strained society. The state exercised unprecedented control over resources and people, accelerating centralization. At the same time, the war years witnessed some of the darkest episodes in Ottoman history, including mass violence and forced population movements that permanently scarred the region and reshaped its demographics. Despite extraordinary effort, the empire could not withstand the combined pressures of war and internal fragmentation. By 1918, defeat was inevitable. The Armistice of Mudros marked the effective end of Ottoman sovereignty, as Allied forces occupied strategic regions and imposed harsh conditions. Yet even in defeat, the legacy of reform and resistance endured. The collapse of imperial authority did not mean the end of Ottoman political culture. The institutions, ideas, and experiences of the late Ottoman period directly influenced the emergence of new political movements. Military officers and intellectuals shaped by constitutionalism and war would later lead struggles for independence and state-building in Anatolia. From a historical perspective, Part 10 reveals that the Ottoman rise was not negated by its eventual fall. Instead, it culminated in a profound transformation of society, governance, and identity. The empire's final decades were marked by intense creativity, conflict, and courage, as leaders and citizens alike grappled with the meaning of sovereignty in a modern world. The Ottoman experience challenges simplistic narratives of decline. Even in its final years, the empire demonstrated adaptability, resilience, and strategic thinking. Its participation in global politics, adoption of modern institutions, and engagement with revolutionary ideas place it firmly within the story of modern history rather than outside it. In conclusion, Part 10 of the Ottoman Empire's rise represents the dramatic finale of a centuries-long process of expansion, reform, and reinvention. Through constitutional revolutions, nationalist struggles, and global war, the Ottomans sought to preserve their state against overwhelming odds. While the empire ultimately dissolved, the legacy of the transformations of this period laid the foundations for new political orders and enduring historical legacies. The Ottoman rise, therefore, must be understood not only as the story of an empire that conquered vast lands, but one that continually reimagined itself in the face of relentless change.
The 11th phase of the Ottoman Empire's rise focuses on the transition from imperial collapse to historical legacy, examining how the end of the empire did not erase its influence, but transformed it into new political, social, and cultural realities. Although the Ottoman state formally ended after the First World War, the ideas, institutions, and experiences forged during its long rise continued to shape the modern Middle East, the Balkans, and Anatolia. Part 11 explores how the final dissolution of the empire became not an endpoint, but a bridge between imperial history and the modern nation-state era. After the Armistice of Mudros in 1918, the Ottoman Empire entered a period of occupation, uncertainty, and fragmentation. Allied forces took control of strategic regions, including Istanbul, while plans were made to divide Ottoman territories among victorious powers. The authority of the Sultanate was severely weakened, and the imperial government found itself unable to resist foreign demands. This moment represented the lowest point in Ottoman political power, yet it also revealed the enduring strength of Ottoman administrative experience and social cohesion at the local level. The Treaty of Sèvres in 1920 symbolized the intended dismemberment of the empire. It proposed severe territorial losses, foreign control over finances, and the creation of new states within former Ottoman lands. For many Ottomans, this treaty was not merely a diplomatic defeat, but an existential threat. It confirmed long-standing fears that European powers sought not reform, but domination. The treaty provoked widespread resistance and delegitimized the authority of the imperial government that had accepted it. Out of this crisis emerged a new form of leadership rooted in the late Ottoman military and bureaucratic tradition. Mustafa Kemal, later known as Ataturk, was a product of Ottoman reform institutions, educated in modern military academies and shaped by constitutionalist ideals. His leadership illustrates how the Ottoman rise, particularly its emphasis on modernization and professional governance, directly enabled the creation of new political movements after imperial collapse. The Turkish War of Independence was not a rejection of the Ottoman past, but a selective continuation of it. Many officers, administrators, and intellectuals who joined the nationalist movement had served the empire and believed they were defending its core lands and people. The organizational skills, command structures, and political strategies used during the struggle reflected centuries of Ottoman statecraft adapted to new circumstances. As nationalist forces gained strength, the legitimacy of the Sultanate declined further. The Sultan, once the symbol of unity and sovereignty, was now seen by many as powerless or compromised by foreign influence. In 1922, the abolition of the Sultanate marked the formal end of the Ottoman political system. This decision was revolutionary, yet it was carried out through institutions and assemblies that echoed Ottoman consultative traditions. The proclamation of the Republic of Turkey in 1923 represented both rupture and continuity. While the new state rejected imperial rule and religious authority in politics, it inherited much from the Ottoman experience. Administrative divisions, legal practices, infrastructure, and even foreign policy concerns reflected the legacy of the empire. The Republic was built not on a blank slate, but on the foundations laid during centuries of Ottoman governance and reform. Beyond Anatolia, the Ottoman legacy unfolded in diverse ways. In the Arab provinces, the collapse of Ottoman authority led to the creation of new states under European mandates. Borders drawn by colonial powers often ignored historical, ethnic, and social realities shaped during Ottoman rule. As a result, many political challenges in the modern Middle East can be traced to the abrupt transition from imperial administration to externally imposed nation-states. In the Balkans, the Ottoman legacy was equally complex. Centuries of Ottoman presence had shaped demographics, architecture, legal traditions, and cultural practices. Even after independence, Balkan states continued to grapple with the memory of Ottoman rule, interpreting it alternately as oppression, coexistence, or shared heritage. These differing narratives reveal how deeply the Ottoman rise had penetrated regional identity. The social legacy of the empire was particularly enduring. Ottoman systems of religious coexistence, local autonomy, and communal organization left lasting imprints.
While not free from inequality or conflict, these systems allowed diverse populations to coexist within a single political framework for centuries. The challenges faced by successor states in managing diversity highlight the significance of this imperial experience. Economically, the transition from empire to nation-states disrupted long-established trade networks. The Ottoman economy had functioned as an integrated system linking Europe, Asia, and Africa. Its fragmentation led to economic dislocation, but also encouraged new forms of national economic planning. Many modern economic institutions in the region evolved from late Ottoman reforms rather than appearing suddenly after independence. Culturally and intellectually, the Ottoman rise produced a rich heritage that continued to inspire later generations. Literature, architecture, music, and scholarship carried Ottoman influences well into the 20th century. Even as new national identities emerged, they often defined themselves in dialogue with the Ottoman past, either embracing certain elements or deliberately rejecting them. From a global perspective, the Ottoman experience reshaped international politics. For centuries, the empire had been a central actor in European diplomacy, Islamic leadership, and global trade. Its decline and dissolution altered the balance of power and contributed to the rise of new geopolitical rivalries. Understanding the Ottoman rise is therefore essential to understanding the modern world order. The Ottoman Empire's long history also challenges linear interpretations of progress and decline. Its rise was not a simple ascent followed by inevitable decay, but a dynamic process marked by adaptation, reform, and resilience. Even in its final decades, the empire demonstrated the capacity to innovate and respond creatively to crisis. This adaptability is a key reason why its legacy remains so influential. Modern historical scholarship increasingly recognizes the Ottoman Empire as a bridge between medieval and modern worlds. Its institutions combined tradition with innovation, religious authority with pragmatic governance, and imperial ambition with administrative sophistication. These characteristics explain both its longevity and its enduring relevance. In reassessing the Ottoman rise, it becomes clear that the empire's significance lies not only in its territorial expansion, but in its ability to manage complexity over centuries. Few states have governed such diverse populations across such vast regions for so long. This achievement reflects a political culture that valued flexibility, negotiation, and institutional continuity. Therefore, the end of the empire should not be viewed solely as a failure. Rather, it represents a transformation shaped by global forces beyond any single state's control. The Ottomans did not disappear from history. They evolved into new forms of political and social organization that continue to shape the present. In conclusion, Part 11 of the Ottoman Empire's rise examines how imperial collapse became a foundation for modern transformation. The institutions, ideas, and experiences developed during the Ottoman centuries did not vanish with the empire's end. Instead, they flowed into the creation of new states, identities, and political systems across a wide region. The Ottoman rise, when viewed in its entirety, is not merely the story of an empire that once ruled vast lands, but the story of a civilization whose influence continues to shape the modern world long after its political structures faded.
The 12th phase of the Ottoman Empire's rise focuses on long-term historical interpretation and the enduring civilizational legacy of the Ottomans, emphasizing how their rise reshaped governance, culture, law, and global interaction far beyond the lifespan of the empire itself. By examining the Ottoman experience across centuries, Part 12 moves beyond political events to analyze how the empire's rise created systems, ideas, and traditions that continue to influence modern societies. This phase highlights the Ottomans not merely as conquerors or rulers, but as architects of a complex imperial civilization that bridged continents, cultures, and historical eras. At the heart of the Ottoman rise was an extraordinary capacity for institutional synthesis. From their earliest expansion, the Ottomans absorbed administrative practices from Byzantium, Islamic caliphates, Turkic steppe traditions, and local customs of conquered lands. This ability to integrate diverse systems into a coherent structure allowed the empire to govern vast territories effectively. Rather than imposing a rigid model, the Ottomans adapted governance to local conditions, which enhanced loyalty and stability. This flexible approach became one of the defining strengths of the empire's rise. The Ottoman legal system exemplified this synthesis. It combined Islamic law with sultanic decrees and customary regulations, creating a balanced framework that addressed both moral authority and practical governance. Courts operated across the empire, providing accessible justice to Muslims and non-Muslims alike. This legal pluralism allowed diverse communities to maintain their traditions while remaining integrated into the imperial order. The durability of this system demonstrates how the Ottoman rise was rooted not only in military power, but in legal legitimacy. Urban development played a central role in consolidating Ottoman authority. Cities such as Istanbul, Bursa, Edirne, Damascus, and Cairo became centers of administration, trade, and culture. The Ottomans invested heavily in public works, including mosques, schools, hospitals, markets, and water systems. These projects were often funded through charitable endowments, embedding social welfare into the fabric of imperial governance. As a result, Ottoman cities became symbols of stability and prosperity, reinforcing the legitimacy of the ruling order. The empire's economic system was another pillar of its rise. Positioned at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa, the Ottoman Empire controlled key trade routes that facilitated the exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies. The state regulated markets, standardized weights and measures, and protected trade routes, creating an environment conducive to commerce. While global economic shifts eventually challenged this system, its effectiveness for centuries underscores the economic sophistication underlying Ottoman expansion. Cultural production flourished alongside political growth. Ottoman art, architecture, literature, and music reflected a refined imperial identity that blended influences from Persian, Arab, Byzantine, and Turkic traditions. Monumental architecture, particularly mosque complexes, expressed both spiritual devotion and imperial grandeur. These cultural achievements were not merely decorative, they communicated power, order, and continuity, reinforcing the empire's presence in everyday life. Education was central to sustaining the Ottoman rise. Religious schools, administrative academies, and later modern institutions trained generations of scholars, judges, soldiers, and officials. This emphasis on education ensured a steady supply of capable administrators who could manage the empire's complexity. Even during periods of crisis, the educational system continued to produce reformers and thinkers who sought solutions rather than surrender to decline. The Ottoman approach to diversity remains one of its most significant legacies. Governing populations of different religions, languages, and ethnicities required mechanisms of coexistence. The empire developed systems that allowed communities a degree of autonomy while maintaining imperial authority. Although imperfect, this model enabled relative stability across diverse regions for centuries. Modern debates about multicultural governance often revisit the Ottoman experience as an early example of managing diversity within a single political framework. Military organization also contributed deeply to the empire's long-term influence. The Ottomans professionalized warfare earlier than many rivals, developing standing armies, disciplined command structures, and advanced logistics. Military institutions evolved continuously, adapting to new technologies and strategies. Even when military dominance waned, the organizational principles established during the empire's rise influenced successor states and modern armies in the region. The diplomatic culture of the Ottomans further illustrates their global significance. The empire maintained complex relations with European powers, Islamic states, and Asian polities. Ottoman diplomacy was pragmatic, flexible, and often innovative, balancing war and negotiation to protect imperial interests. This engagement positioned the empire as a central actor in international politics for centuries and shaped the development of modern diplomatic practices. Intellectually, the Ottoman rise fostered a worldview that valued order, hierarchy, and moral responsibility. Scholars debated theology, philosophy, science, and governance within an imperial context that encouraged continuity rather than radical rupture. Later reform movements emerged from this intellectual tradition, demonstrating that the empire's capacity for self-criticism was rooted in its own scholarly culture rather than imposed entirely from outside. The transition from empire to modern states did not erase this legacy. Many administrative boundaries, legal concepts, and social practices in the Middle East, the Balkans, and Anatolia trace their origins to Ottoman rule. Even where the empire is remembered negatively, its imprint remains visible in institutions, cities, and cultural memory. This persistence highlights the depth of the Ottoman rise as a civilizational process rather than a temporary political phenomenon. Historical memory of the Ottomans varies widely. In some regions, the empire is remembered as a source of stability and coexistence, in others as a symbol of domination. These differing perspectives reflect the complexity of imperial rule rather than a single narrative of success or failure. Understanding the Ottoman rise requires acknowledging both its achievements and its limitations, recognizing that longevity itself is evidence of adaptive strength. Modern scholarship increasingly emphasizes the Ottomans as participants in global history rather than isolated actors. Their interactions with Europe, Asia, and Africa shaped economic systems, cultural exchanges, and political developments on a global scale. The empire's rise coincided with the emergence of the modern world, and its responses to change influenced how modernization unfolded beyond Europe. The endurance of Ottoman influence also challenges assumptions about linear progress. The empire's rise was followed by periods of reform, crisis, and reinvention, rather than a sudden collapse. This cyclical pattern suggests that historical change is often gradual and negotiated, shaped by human agency as much as by structural forces. The Ottoman case offers valuable insight into how states adapt over long periods. From a comparative perspective, the Ottoman Empire stands alongside other great empires in world history, yet its longevity and diversity set it apart. Few empires managed to govern such varied populations across 3 continents for so long without fragmenting entirely. This achievement reflects a political culture that prioritized balance, compromise, and institutional continuity. In evaluating the Ottoman rise, it becomes clear that its greatest legacy lies in its systems rather than its conquests. Territorial expansion brought power, but institutions sustained it. Law, administration, education, and culture formed the backbone of imperial stability. These elements continued to shape societies long after the empire's political authority ended. The lessons of the Ottoman experience remain relevant today. Issues of governance, diversity, reform, and identity continue to challenge modern states. The Ottoman rise demonstrates that flexibility, institutional depth, and cultural integration can sustain complex societies over long periods. While no historical model can be replicated exactly, the principles underlying Ottoman success offer valuable perspectives. In conclusion, Part 12 of the Ottoman Empire's rise presents a broad reflection on imperial legacy and historical significance. The Ottomans were not only builders of an empire, but creators of a lasting civilization that shaped regions, institutions, and identities across centuries. Their rise was a continuous process of adaptation, synthesis, and governance that extended far.
The 13th phase of the Ottoman Empire's rise moves into a deeper analytical reflection on historical continuity, memory, and reinterpretation, focusing on how the Ottoman experience has been understood, reevaluated, and reimagined in the modern world. While earlier parts examined political events, reforms, and legacies, Part 13 explores how the Ottoman rise continues to live on through historiography, identity debates, cultural revival, and geopolitical thought. This phase emphasizes that the Ottoman Empire did not simply belong to the past, rather, it remains an active reference point in shaping modern narratives, aspirations, and conflicts. One of the most striking aspects of the Ottoman rise is how differently it has been remembered across regions and generations. In the immediate aftermath of the empire's dissolution, many successor states framed the Ottoman period as an era of stagnation or oppression. This interpretation served political purposes, allowing new nation-states to legitimize themselves by distancing their identities from imperial rule. However, such narratives often oversimplified a far more complex historical reality, reducing centuries of governance, coexistence, and reform into a single negative image. Over time, historical scholarship began to challenge these early nationalist interpretations. Researchers gained access to Ottoman archives and reassessed the empire using economic, social, and institutional analysis rather than ideological judgment. This shift revealed an empire that was dynamic, adaptive, and deeply interconnected with global developments. The Ottoman rise, once portrayed as a purely military phenomenon followed by inevitable decline, came to be understood as a long process of institutional creativity and pragmatic governance. The role of archives has been especially significant in reshaping understanding. Ottoman administrative records, court documents, tax registers, and correspondence provide detailed insight into everyday life and state functioning. These sources reveal a state that was far more organized and responsive than earlier stereotypes suggested. Through them, historians have traced how the empire managed land, labor, justice, and diversity, highlighting the administrative foundations that sustained Ottoman power for centuries. Modern Turkey's relationship with the Ottoman past illustrates the complexity of historical memory. In the early Republican era, the Ottoman Empire was often depicted as a burden that had prevented modernization. Emphasis was placed on secularism, nationalism, and westernization, deliberately minimizing imperial heritage. Yet, even during this period, Ottoman institutions quietly influenced governance, law, and foreign policy. Over time, public discourse began to re-engage with Ottoman history in more nuanced ways. In recent decades, there has been a renewed cultural and intellectual interest in the Ottoman past. Architecture, literature, television, and academic studies have contributed to a reassessment of imperial history. This revival does not necessarily seek to restore the empire, but rather to reclaim historical depth and continuity. The Ottoman rise is increasingly viewed as a source of cultural confidence and historical experience, rather than embarrassment or failure. In the Balkans, Ottoman memory remains contested. For some communities, the empire represents centuries of foreign domination. For others, it symbolizes coexistence, trade, and cultural exchange. These divergent memories coexist uneasily, shaping modern politics and identity debates. The Ottoman rise, in this context, is not merely a historical subject, but a living issue that influences interethnic relations and national narratives. The Arab world presents another complex engagement with the Ottoman legacy. Early 20th century Arab nationalism often portrayed Ottoman rule as a period of neglect or oppression.
However, more recent scholarship has emphasized the integration of Arab provinces into imperial administration and global networks. Cities such as Damascus, Baghdad, and Cairo flourished under Ottoman governance, serving as key centers of learning and commerce. This reassessment challenges simplistic portrayals and highlights shared historical experiences. The Ottoman rise also occupies a significant place in discussions of Islamic political history. As the longest-lasting major Muslim empire, the Ottomans shaped ideas about caliphate, sovereignty, and religious authority. Their model combined Islamic legitimacy with pragmatic governance, adapting religious principles to changing political realities. Modern debates about Islam and governance often reference the Ottoman experience, either as an example of balance or as a subject of critique. From a global historical perspective, the Ottoman Empire is increasingly recognized as a central actor rather than a peripheral one. Its interactions with Europe influenced military innovation, diplomacy, trade, and cultural exchange. The empire was deeply involved in the early modern world system, shaping developments that extended far beyond its borders. Understanding the Ottoman rise, therefore, contributes to a more inclusive and interconnected view of world history. The concept of decline, long associated with Ottoman history, has also been reevaluated. Rather than a steady downward trajectory, historians now describe cycles of reform, crisis, and recovery. The empire's ability to survive for centuries despite immense challenges suggests resilience rather than weakness. The rise of the Ottomans, when viewed through this lens, becomes a story of continuous adaptation rather than inevitable decay. Educational narratives play a crucial role in shaping public understanding of the Ottoman past. Textbooks, curricula, and popular media influence how new generations perceive imperial history. Where the Ottoman rise is presented as a shared heritage rather than a divisive memory, it can foster dialogue and mutual understanding. Conversely, selective or politicized interpretations risk reinforcing stereotypes and historical grievances. The Ottoman experience also informs contemporary discussions about governance and diversity. The empire managed religious and ethnic pluralism through flexible systems that balanced central authority with local autonomy. While not without flaws, this approach allowed coexistence across vast and varied territories. In an era marked by debates over multiculturalism and integration, the Ottoman rise offers historical insights into managing complexity without uniformity. Geopolitically, references to the Ottoman past continue to shape regional discourse. Political leaders, intellectuals, and commentators sometimes invoke imperial history to frame modern ambitions or responsibilities. While such references can be controversial, they underscore the enduring symbolic power of the Ottoman rise. History, in this sense, becomes a resource for understanding identity and strategy rather than a static record of events. Cultural continuity is another dimension of Ottoman legacy. Language, cuisine, music, and architecture across large parts of Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa bear Ottoman influences. These everyday cultural elements often persist even where political memory is contested. They remind us that the Ottoman rise shaped not only institutions and borders, but also lived experiences and shared traditions. The reevaluation of the Ottoman Empire has also influenced comparative imperial studies. Scholars increasingly compare the Ottomans with other long-lasting empires, examining similarities and differences in governance, legitimacy, and decline. Such comparisons highlight the unique features of the Ottoman rise, particularly its emphasis on institutional flexibility and negotiated authority. In the digital age, access to historical material has expanded dramatically. Digitized archives, online publications, and global academic collaboration have democratized Ottoman studies. This accessibility allows for more diverse perspectives and challenges older Eurocentric or nationalist frameworks. As interpretations evolve, the Ottoman rise emerges not as a monolithic symbol of glory or decline, but as a complex civilization whose experiences offer enduring insights into governance, diversity, and historical change. Through this lens, the Ottoman rise remains a vital chapter in understanding both the past and the present.
The 14th phase of the Ottoman Empire's rise represents a comprehensive synthesis of the empire's transformation, highlighting the interplay of military innovation, administrative evolution, economic integration, cultural development, and geopolitical strategy. By this stage, it is evident that the Ottoman rise was not a singular or uniform process, but a continuous adaptation to internal challenges and external pressures. Part 14 examines how the empire maintained coherence, expanded influence, and negotiated identity across centuries, leaving a profound impact on subsequent historical developments. Central to the Ottoman rise was its military innovation, which provided the initial framework for expansion and sustained authority. From the establishment of the Janissary Corps in the 14th century to the modernization initiatives of the 19th century, the Ottomans continually adjusted military organization to meet emerging threats. The Janissaries, originally recruited through the Devshirme system, offered a professional, loyal force capable of supporting both offensive campaigns and internal stability. Over time, however, the Janissaries' resistance to reform became a significant obstacle, illustrating the delicate balance between institutional strength and rigidity. The empire's ability to replace or restructure such forces, particularly under Mahmud II and subsequent reformers, demonstrates a capacity for decisive institutional adaptation that was critical to the Ottoman rise. Administrative centralization and bureaucratic development were equally important. The Ottoman state developed a layered governance structure, combining the authority of the sultan, viziers, provincial governors, and local officials. This system allowed for both centralized policy implementation and flexible local administration. Taxation, law enforcement, and judicial oversight were increasingly standardized, providing a coherent framework that facilitated long-term stability and expansion. While corruption, inefficiency, and local resistance were recurring challenges, the underlying structure proved resilient, enabling the empire to endure for centuries. Economic integration reinforced both military and administrative capacity. Strategically located between Europe, Asia, and Africa, the Ottoman Empire controlled vital trade routes, including the Silk Road, Mediterranean sea lanes, and the Red Sea corridor. This positioning allowed the Ottomans to facilitate commerce, collect revenue, and maintain diplomatic leverage with European and Asian powers. The state implemented regulations to protect trade, standardize measures, and oversee markets, fostering economic vitality. Furthermore, the development of specialized artisan guilds, urban marketplaces, and infrastructure such as caravanserais and bridges strengthened internal cohesion and encouraged regional commerce. While the empire eventually faced economic competition from industrial Europe, its earlier integration into global trade networks was a hallmark of its rise. Cultural and intellectual development played a critical role in sustaining the empire. Ottoman rulers invested heavily in education, literature, architecture, and the arts. Madrasas provided religious and legal education, while secular institutions trained administrators, military officers, and engineers. Monumental architecture, including mosque complexes and civic buildings, projected both spiritual authority and imperial power. Literary traditions, historical chronicles, and scholarly works documented governance, culture, and diplomacy, preserving knowledge that would influence later generations. Music, calligraphy, and visual arts reflected a sophisticated synthesis of Turkic, Persian, Arab, and Byzantine influences, demonstrating the empire's capacity for cultural adaptation and innovation.
The Ottoman Empire's engagement with diverse populations contributed to its remarkable resilience. Its multi-ethnic and multi-religious subjects were governed through systems that allowed communal autonomy under overarching imperial authority. The millet system, for instance, enabled religious communities to administer their own legal and educational affairs while remaining loyal to the Sultan. This approach balanced local identity with imperial cohesion, fostering stability in regions with significant linguistic, religious, and cultural diversity. Although not without conflict, the model of negotiated authority over heterogeneous populations remains one of the most significant legacies of the Ottoman rise. Diplomacy was a cornerstone of the empire's expansion and survival. The Ottomans developed a sophisticated diplomatic apparatus capable of negotiating alliances, conducting intelligence operations, and managing conflicts with neighboring powers. Permanent embassies in European capitals, regular communication with neighboring Islamic states, and careful treaty-making allowed the empire to project influence without constant warfare. Ottoman diplomacy blended pragmatism, strategic foresight, and cultural awareness, reinforcing both internal legitimacy and external credibility. The 19th century introduced unprecedented challenges, prompting an intensified phase of modernization. European industrialization, technological advances, and colonial expansion placed enormous pressure on the empire. Military defeats, economic dependency, and nationalist movements forced the Ottomans to implement comprehensive reforms, including the Nizam-i-Jadid, Tanzimat, and later constitutional measures. These initiatives sought to modernize the army, bureaucracy, education system, and legal framework. While met with resistance, these reforms reveal a central feature of the Ottoman rise: the ability to respond to existential threats with structural and ideological innovation. The rise of nationalist movements within Ottoman territories represents a critical inflection point. Balkan, Arab, and Armenian nationalist aspirations challenged imperial cohesion and redefined governance strategies. The empire's response varied from negotiation and decentralization to military suppression and centralization. These interactions highlight the complex relationship between imperial authority and emerging national consciousness, demonstrating how the Ottoman rise was not only a story of territorial expansion, but also of political adaptation in the face of social and ideological change. World War I marked both the culmination and the crisis of the Ottoman state. The empire's entry into the war was a strategic attempt to safeguard sovereignty and reclaim influence. Military campaigns demonstrated organizational strength and the legacy of reform, but also revealed the limits of the empire's capacity to manage multiple fronts and internal displacement. The war accelerated social, demographic, and economic transformations, culminating in the empire's formal dissolution. Yet the experience reinforced the enduring lessons of the Ottoman rise: the necessity of adaptability, the integration of diverse populations, and the importance of institutional and military resilience. The post-imperial period reflects the long-term impact of the Ottoman rise. Successor states inherited legal systems, administrative practices, and cultural norms that shaped modern governance. The Turkic Republic, in particular, emerged from the Ottoman reformist tradition, combining centralized authority with secular modernization and professional bureaucracy. Across the former empire, Ottoman institutions and legacies influenced political structures, educational systems, and social organization, demonstrating that the empire's rise continued to shape the modern world even after its end. Historiographically, the Ottoman rise has undergone substantial reevaluation. Earlier narratives emphasized decline, military defeat, or stagnation, but modern scholarship recognizes the empire's dynamic adaptability, innovative governance, and complex social management.
The rise is increasingly seen as a process defined by flexibility, institutional depth, and resilience rather than solely by conquest or expansion. This interpretive shift underscores the empire's relevance to contemporary discussions of governance, diversity, and historical continuity. The Ottoman Empire's legacy also resonates in cultural memory. Its architecture, cuisine, music, literature, and ceremonial practices remain influential across multiple regions. These cultural elements illustrate the empire's ability to synthesize diverse traditions into a coherent imperial identity. Moreover, they continue to serve as points of reference in identity formation, tourism, and popular culture, reflecting the lasting social and cultural dimensions of the Ottoman rise. In comparative terms, the Ottoman rise offers insights into the nature of long-lived empires. It demonstrates how flexible institutions, military innovation, economic integration, cultural synthesis, and pragmatic diplomacy can sustain imperial power across centuries. The empire's ability to manage diversity and adapt to changing global circumstances contrasts with more rigid polities.
The 15th phase of the Ottoman Empire's rise examines the culmination of centuries of expansion, reform, and adaptation, focusing on how the empire's strategies for governance, diplomacy, and cultural integration allowed it to survive and influence regional and global history. While earlier parts analyzed military, administrative, and social dimensions, Part 15 emphasizes the interconnectedness of these elements and the empire's capacity to innovate under pressure. It also considers the lessons of the Ottoman experience for understanding empire, resilience, and historical transformation. At the core of the Ottoman rise was an ability to integrate diverse territories into a functional and coherent state. From the earliest conquests in Anatolia and the Balkans to the later acquisition of Arab provinces, the Ottomans demonstrated flexibility in administering lands with different languages, religions, and social structures. Local elites were often co-opted into the imperial system, while central authorities maintained overall oversight. This balance between decentralization and centralization allowed the empire to maintain stability over vast regions, providing the institutional foundation that underpinned the Ottoman rise. Military organization remained central throughout the empire's growth. From the Janissary Corps to modernized 19th-century armies, the Ottomans invested heavily in creating disciplined, professional forces capable of both conquest and defense. Innovations in artillery, siegecraft, and logistics enabled the empire to expand rapidly in the 14th through 16th centuries. Even when internal challenges emerged, such as the Janissaries' resistance to reform, the state demonstrated an ability to restructure its forces, as seen in the military reforms under Mahmud II and subsequent sultans. Military strength, therefore, was both a cause and a consequence of the empire's administrative and territorial expansion. The Ottoman rise was also driven by economic strategy and global connectivity. By controlling key trade routes between Europe, Asia, and Africa, the empire facilitated commerce and collected revenue that financed military campaigns, administrative structures, and public works. Urban centers like Istanbul, Cairo, Aleppo, and Bursa became hubs of trade, culture, and education. Markets, caravanserais, and port infrastructure supported domestic production and international exchange, while taxation and financial regulations ensured state revenue. This economic integration reinforced imperial cohesion and allowed the Ottomans to adapt to changing global dynamics. Cultural and intellectual developments played a key role in sustaining the empire. The Ottomans cultivated a sophisticated cultural identity that blended Turkic, Persian, Arab, and Byzantine influences. Architecture, literature, calligraphy, and music not only expressed aesthetic achievement, but also reinforced imperial authority. Educational institutions produced administrators, scholars, and professionals capable of implementing reforms and governing effectively. Through the arts and scholarship, the Ottomans projected power, cultivated legitimacy, and fostered social cohesion. The empire's cultural synthesis was therefore both a reflection of and a tool for sustaining the Ottoman rise. Religious and social organization was another crucial factor. The millet system allowed religious communities to govern their own internal affairs while remaining under imperial authority, promoting social stability in a multi-religious empire. Islamic law coexisted with sultanic decrees and customary practices, creating a legal framework that accommodated diversity. Social mobility, facilitated through military service, bureaucratic positions, or religious education, enabled talented individuals to contribute to state administration. By balancing tradition and innovation, the Ottomans created a durable societal structure that supported their expansion and governance. Diplomacy remained a cornerstone of Ottoman strategy. The empire maintained relations with European powers, neighboring Islamic states, and Asian polities through negotiation, treaties, and strategic alliances. Permanent embassies, intelligence networks, and skilled envoys allowed the Ottomans to manage conflicts, secure trade, and expand influence without relying solely on military force. Diplomacy also served to legitimize Ottoman authority, projecting power and stability in a highly interconnected world. The empire's diplomatic flexibility contributed significantly to its rise and longevity. The 19th century introduced new challenges, including European industrialization, nationalist movements, and economic competition. Reforms under the Tanzimat, the First and Second Constitutional periods, and other initiatives sought to modernize the military, bureaucracy, and legal systems. While these reforms met resistance and had uneven success, they demonstrate the empire's capacity for adaptation. Ottoman leaders recognized that survival required institutional innovation and ideological flexibility, reflecting a broader pattern that had characterized the empire's rise for centuries. Nationalism presented a critical internal challenge. Balkan, Arab, and Armenian nationalist movements sought autonomy or independence, testing the limits of Ottoman authority. Responses ranged from negotiation and decentralization to military suppression and administrative centralization. These dynamics illustrate the tension between empire and emerging national consciousness, highlighting the political and social complexity of sustaining a multi-ethnic state. Managing these pressures was a recurring theme in the Ottoman rise, requiring a combination of military, administrative, and ideological strategies. World War I marked the final phase of the Ottoman Empire as a political entity. The empire's alignment with Germany and the Central Powers was a strategic choice aimed at preserving sovereignty and reclaiming influence. Military campaigns, such as the defense of Gallipoli and operations in Mesopotamia, demonstrated resilience and organizational skill even amid resource constraints. However, war exacerbated social, economic, and demographic pressures, ultimately leading to the empire's formal dissolution. Despite defeat, the experience highlighted the Ottoman legacy of adaptability, strategic thinking, and institutional continuity. The post-war period illustrates the enduring impact of the Ottoman rise. Successor states inherited legal frameworks, administrative divisions, infrastructure, and cultural practices developed over centuries. The Turkish Republic, emerging from the reformist and constitutionalist traditions of the late empire, combined centralized governance with secular modernization. In Arab and Balkan regions, Ottoman administrative and social legacies continued to shape political structures, education, and cultural identity. The empire's rise had therefore created long-lasting foundations that influenced modern nation-states. Historiographically, the Ottoman rise has been reinterpreted over time. Early narratives often emphasized decline or stagnation, while modern scholarship recognizes the empire's adaptability, institutional sophistication, and global integration. The rise is increasingly seen as a continuous process of innovation, reform, and negotiation rather than a linear story of conquest followed by decay. This reassessment underscores the importance of understanding the empire as a dynamic and enduring political and cultural force. Cultural memory of the Ottoman Empire remains significant. Architecture, cuisine, music, and literary traditions continued to shape regional identity and daily life across former Ottoman territories. These cultural imprints reflect centuries of governance, social integration, and artistic production, demonstrating that the Ottoman rise influenced not only political and economic structures, but also lived experience. Such legacies continue to inform contemporary debates about heritage, identity, and historical interpretation. In comparative terms, the Ottoman Empire offers valuable insights into long-term statecraft. Its ability to govern diverse populations, adapt to changing global conditions, and balance tradition with innovation distinguishes it from many other empires. The rise of the Ottomans was not solely a product of conquest. It was a sustained process of institutional development, cultural synthesis, and strategic governance that allowed the empire to endure and influence regions far beyond its political lifespan. Ultimately, Part 15 emphasizes that the Ottoman rise was a multidimensional process. Military strength, administrative sophistication, economic integration, cultural development, diplomatic skill, and social organization combined to sustain the empire across centuries. Even in the face of internal challenges, external threats, and eventual dissolution, the empire demonstrated resilience, adaptability, and institutional continuity. Its rise cannot be measured solely by territory or military conquest, but by the enduring structures, ideas, and cultural legacies it created. In conclusion, Part 15 presents a comprehensive view of how the empire maintained cohesion, expanded influence, and navigated complex.
The 16th phase of the Ottoman Empire's rise delves into the empire's structural sophistication, social organization, and long-term influence, focusing on how centuries of adaptation, governance, and cultural integration shaped both the empire's longevity and its enduring legacy. Part 16 explores the intersection of military innovation, bureaucratic development, economic management, and cultural production, emphasizing that the Ottoman rise was a multidimensional process that combined pragmatic administration with ideological legitimacy. It also considers the empire's role in global history, highlighting its interactions with European powers, Islamic polities, and Asian neighbors. A central component of the Ottoman rise was the empire's military system, which combined professionalization with flexibility. The Janissary Corps, created in the 14th century, established a disciplined, loyal, and centrally controlled infantry capable of executing complex campaigns. Initially recruited through the Devshirme system, the Janissaries were educated and trained in both military and administrative skills, creating a cadre that could serve as commanders, governors, or bureaucrats. The Janissaries' influence extended beyond the battlefield. Their involvement in palace politics, succession disputes, and regional administration illustrates the interconnection between military capacity and governance. The Ottoman state's ability to reform, replace, or restructure military institutions, particularly in response to the Janissaries' later resistance, exemplifies the empire's adaptive governance. Administrative centralization was another hallmark of the Ottoman rise. The empire developed a layered bureaucracy that balanced the authority of the Sultan with provincial governors, local elites, and religious authorities. The vizierate served as a critical coordinating mechanism, ensuring policy implementation across vast territories. Provincial officials collected taxes, maintained order, and administered justice, often exercising considerable autonomy while remaining accountable to central authority.
This balance between central oversight and local governance enabled the empire to manage diverse regions effectively, from Anatolia and the Balkans to the Arab provinces. The integration of customary, religious, and codified law created a flexible legal framework that reinforced legitimacy and facilitated social cohesion. Economic strategy played a crucial role in sustaining the Ottoman rise. The empire controlled key trade routes connecting Europe, Asia, and Africa, allowing it to benefit from commerce, customs duties, and taxation. Cities such as Istanbul, Aleppo, Cairo, and Salonika became economic hubs, supporting markets, artisans, and merchants. The state regulated trade to ensure stability, implemented standardized measures, and protected caravan and maritime routes. Agricultural productivity was supported through land tenure systems, irrigation, and taxation policies, while craft guilds ensured quality and regulated labor. This economic integration allowed the empire to finance military campaigns, administrative functions, and public works, reinforcing both expansion and stability. Cultural and intellectual development contributed to the empire's cohesion and legitimacy. Ottoman rulers invested in education, architecture, literature, and the arts, creating a vibrant imperial culture that projected authority and identity. Madrasas provided religious and legal education, while secular schools trained administrators and military officers. Literature, history, and scholarship documented governance, law, and diplomacy, preserving institutional knowledge. Monumental architecture, including mosques, bridges, and palaces, symbolized both spiritual and political power. Music, calligraphy, and visual arts reflected a synthesis of Turkic, Persian, Arab, and Byzantine traditions, creating a distinct Ottoman cultural identity that reinforced loyalty and social cohesion. The empire's social organization further strengthened its rise. The millet system allowed religious communities to manage internal affairs while remaining under imperial authority, fostering coexistence in a multi-ethnic, multi-religious society. Islamic law, sultanic decrees, and customary practice provided a coherent legal framework accommodating diverse populations. Social mobility through military service, education, and bureaucratic appointments allowed talented individuals to contribute to governance, reinforcing meritocracy within the empire's hierarchical structure. These mechanisms enabled the Ottomans to maintain stability across regions with distinct languages, religions, and cultural traditions. Diplomatic skill was integral to the empire's expansion and survival. The Ottomans maintained complex relations with European powers, neighboring Islamic states, and Asian polities. Permanent embassies, skilled envoys, and intelligence networks allowed the empire to negotiate alliances, secure trade agreements, and manage conflicts. Diplomacy was often intertwined with military strategy, enabling the Ottomans to expand influence without relying solely on warfare. Through careful negotiation and strategic foresight, the empire maintained regional hegemony and global relevance for centuries. The rise of nationalism in the 19th century presented a significant challenge. Balkan, Arab, and Armenian nationalist movements tested imperial cohesion, prompting reforms and military responses. The Tanzimat reforms, constitutional periods, and modernization initiatives sought to balance central authority with emerging demands for participation, equality, and representation. These efforts reflected the empire's long-standing capacity for institutional adaptation, even as external pressures and internal dissent intensified. The Ottoman response to nationalism illustrates the broader dynamic of the empire's rise, a continuous negotiation between tradition, reform, and survival. World War I represented the culmination of internal and external pressures on the Ottoman state. The empire's alliance with Germany and the Central Powers was a strategic decision aimed at preserving sovereignty and territorial integrity. Military campaigns demonstrated organizational skill and resilience, but also revealed structural weaknesses. Social disruption, economic strain, and population displacement intensified during the war, ultimately leading to the empire's dissolution.
Yet the Ottoman experience during the war highlighted the persistence of institutional knowledge, adaptive strategy, and administrative competence, even in the face of existential threat. The post-imperial period illustrates the enduring influence of the Ottoman rise. Successor states inherited legal frameworks, administrative divisions, infrastructure, and cultural practices developed over centuries. In Turkey, reforms drew on the Ottoman tradition of centralized administration, professional bureaucracy, and strategic governance. Across the Middle East and Balkans, Ottoman legacies continued to shape education, law, and social organization. The empire's rise had created foundations that influenced modern nation-states long after political authority had ended. Historiographical reevaluation has transformed understanding of the Ottoman rise. Earlier interpretations emphasized decline, corruption, or stagnation. Modern scholarship, using archival evidence and comparative methods, recognizes the empire's adaptability, institutional sophistication, and global integration. The rise is now understood as a continuous process of reform, negotiation, and innovation, challenging simplistic narratives of inevitable decay. This perspective emphasizes the Ottoman Empire as a dynamic civilization with lessons for governance, social integration, and cultural synthesis. Cultural memory further reinforces the empire's enduring relevance. Architectural monuments, cuisine, literature, music, and ceremonial practices continued to shape identity and everyday life in former Ottoman territories. These legacies reflect centuries of governance, social integration, and artistic achievement, underscoring that the Ottoman rise influenced both political structures and lived experience. Cultural continuities provide a bridge between past and present, highlighting the empire's enduring societal impact. The Ottoman rise also offers comparative insights into the nature of long-lived empires. Its ability to integrate diverse populations, adapt to shifting geopolitical landscapes, and balance tradition with reform distinguishes it from other contemporary polities. The combination of military strength, administrative sophistication, economic integration, cultural synthesis, and diplomatic skill provides a model of sustained imperial governance. Lessons from the Ottoman rise remain relevant for understanding statecraft, resilience, and social cohesion in both historical and modern contexts. Ultimately, the 16th phase emphasizes that the Ottoman rise was a multidimensional process characterized by adaptability, institutional depth, and cultural integration. Military power, bureaucratic organization, economic management, diplomatic acumen, social systems, and cultural production combined to create a durable empire capable of withstanding internal and external pressures. Even as the empire faced decline and dissolution, the principles and practices developed during its rise continued to influence successor states, regional politics, and global historiography. In conclusion, Part 16 presents a holistic understanding of the Ottoman Empire's rise. The empire's longevity.
The 17th phase of the Ottoman Empire's rise focuses on the deeper structural foundations that allow the empire to endure for more than 6 centuries, emphasizing long-term governance, ideological legitimacy, and the empire's ability to continuously redefine itself in response to internal and external pressures. Rather than viewing the Ottoman rise as a short period of conquest followed by stagnation, Part 17 highlights how the empire's institutions matured, adapted, and evolved, enabling it to remain a central power in regional and global affairs for generations. This phase examines the Ottoman political mindset, social resilience, and strategic flexibility that transformed a frontier principality into a lasting imperial civilization. At the heart of the Ottoman rise was a unique understanding of sovereignty. Unlike many medieval states that relied solely on dynastic or tribal legitimacy, the Ottomans developed a layered concept of authority that combined military leadership, Islamic legitimacy, and administrative competence. The Sultan was not only a warrior king, but also a lawgiver and protector of order.
This multifaceted role allowed Ottoman rulers to command loyalty from soldiers, bureaucrats, religious scholars, and provincial elites. Over time, sovereignty became institutional rather than purely personal, ensuring continuity even during periods of weak leadership or succession disputes. The imperial household and palace system played a critical role in sustaining this continuity. The Topkapi Palace was not merely a royal residence, but the administrative and symbolic heart of the empire. Decisions regarding governance, diplomacy, military campaigns, and succession were shaped within its walls. The training of officials through palace schools created a professional ruling class loyal to the state rather than to hereditary aristocracies. This system minimized the fragmentation of power and reinforced centralized authority, a key factor in the Ottoman rise and long-term stability. Provincial administration further illustrates the empire's adaptive strength. The Ottomans governed vast territories through a combination of direct rule and delegated authority. Governors, judges, and tax officials were appointed from the center, but worked closely with local elites, religious leaders, and community representatives. This pragmatic approach allowed the empire to respect regional customs while maintaining imperial oversight. By avoiding excessive interference in local affairs, the Ottomans reduced resistance and fostered cooperation, enabling sustained expansion and effective governance across diverse regions. The legal framework of the empire exemplified institutional flexibility. Ottoman law blended Islamic jurisprudence, Sharia, sultanic decrees, Kanun, and local customs. This hybrid system allowed rulers to address practical governance issues while maintaining religious legitimacy. Courts operated at multiple levels, providing access to justice for Muslims and non-Muslims alike. Legal pluralism not only enhanced social stability, but also reinforced the perception of the Ottoman state as a fair and orderly authority, strengthening loyalty among its subjects. Economic management was another pillar of the Ottoman rise. The empire's fiscal system balanced state needs with social sustainability. Land tenure arrangements, such as the Timar system, tied military service to agricultural productivity, ensuring a steady supply of revenue and soldiers. Urban economies flourished under state protection, with guilds regulating production and trade. By maintaining stable markets and protecting trade routes, the Ottomans integrated regional economies into a broader imperial network, reinforcing both prosperity and political cohesion. Trade and global connectivity further elevated the empire's status. Positioned between Europe, Asia, and Africa, the Ottomans controlled key commercial corridors that facilitated the exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies. Merchants from Venice, Genoa, Persia, India, and the Arab world operated within Ottoman territories, benefiting from legal protections and infrastructure. This openness to commerce enhanced state revenue and fostered cultural exchange, positioning the empire as a central node in early modern globalization. Cultural patronage reinforced imperial identity and legitimacy. Ottoman rulers invested heavily in architecture, education, and the arts, using cultural production as a means of projecting power and unity. Mosques, schools, hospitals, and public works were constructed across the empire, symbolizing both religious devotion and state responsibility. Literature, historiography, and poetry celebrated imperial achievements and preserved collective memory. Through culture, the Ottomans communicated a vision of order, continuity, and divine favor that strengthened loyalty and cohesion. Religion played a complex but stabilizing role in the Ottoman rise. While Islam formed the ideological foundation of the state, the empire adopted a pragmatic approach to religious diversity. Non-Muslim communities were granted autonomy in personal and communal affairs, reducing conflict and encouraging cooperation. Religious institutions supported education, charity, and social welfare, reinforcing the moral authority of the state. By balancing religious legitimacy with tolerance, the Ottomans managed to govern a multi-faith empire with remarkable durability. Military organization continued to evolve as the empire matured.
While early expansion relied on cavalry and frontier warfare, later success depended on disciplined infantry, artillery, and naval power. The Ottomans invested in fortifications, logistics, and training, ensuring readiness across multiple fronts. Even when military challenges emerged, the state demonstrated an ability to reassess its forces. This continuous adaptation underscores the idea that the Ottoman rise was not static, but dynamic, shaped by learning and innovation. The empire's diplomatic culture further distinguished it from contemporaries. Ottoman diplomacy was sophisticated, pragmatic, and long-term in outlook. Treaties, alliances, and negotiations were used strategically to manage rivalries and secure advantages. Permanent embassies and detailed intelligence networks allowed the Ottomans to respond effectively to shifting geopolitical realities. Diplomacy complemented military power, enabling the empire to expand influence without constant warfare and to preserve stability during periods of transition. Social mobility was a defining feature of Ottoman society and a key factor in its rise. Unlike feudal systems based on hereditary privilege, the Ottoman state offered pathways for advancement through education, military service, and administrative talent. Individuals from diverse backgrounds could rise to positions of authority, fostering loyalty and competence within the ruling elite. This meritocratic element strengthened governance and ensured a steady supply of capable administrators and commanders. Challenges and crises were inevitable in such a vast empire, yet the Ottoman response to adversity reveals the depth of its institutional resilience. Rebellions, economic downturns, and external threats tested imperial cohesion, but reforms and adjustments often followed. Rather than collapsing under pressure, the empire recalibrated policies, restructured institutions, and negotiated compromises. This capacity for self-correction was a defining characteristic of the Ottoman rise and longevity. The intellectual climate of the empire also contributed to adaptability. Scholars, jurists, and administrators engaged in debate and interpretation, allowing ideas to evolve within accepted frameworks. Knowledge from Europe, Persia, and the Arab world was selectively integrated, enriching Ottoman thought. This openness to learning and synthesis supporting innovation while preserving cultural identity, reinforcing the empire's ability to navigate change. In global perspective, the Ottoman rise represents a distinctive model of empire building. Unlike colonial empires driven primarily by overseas expansion, the Ottomans constructed a contiguous, land-based empire rooted in administrative integration and social accommodation. Their success lay not only in conquest, but in governance, legitimacy, and cultural synthesis. This model challenges simplistic narratives of imperial domination and highlights the importance of institutional depth and adaptability. The legacy of the Ottoman rise extends far beyond its political life. Modern states in the Middle East, Balkans, and Anatolia inherited administrative practices, legal concepts, and cultural traditions shaped by centuries of Ottoman rule. Even contemporary debates about governance, identity, and pluralism reflect Ottoman precedents. Understanding this rise provides valuable insight into the historical roots of modern societies and political structures. Ultimately, Part 17 underscores that the Ottoman Empire's rise was not a single historical moment, but a continuous process of construction, adaptation, and renewal. Its strength derived from the integration of military power, administrative sophistication, economic management, cultural patronage, religious legitimacy, and diplomatic skill. These elements combined to create a resilient imperial system capable of enduring profound challenges over centuries. In conclusion, the 17th phase of the Ottoman Empire's rise highlights the empire's deep structural resilience and strategic intelligence. By institutionalizing authority, embracing diversity, and adapting to change, the Ottomans transformed a frontier state into one of
The 18th phase of the Ottoman Empire's rise examines the empire at a point where its long-developed institutions, traditions, and governing philosophies were fully matured, yet increasingly tested by a rapidly changing world.
Rather than portraying this period as a simple transition toward decline, Part 18 emphasizes continuity, adaptation, and strategic recalibration. The Ottoman Empire at this stage was not a static relic of the medieval past, but a living political organism attempting to reconcile its imperial heritage with new global realities. This phase highlights how the Ottomans sought to preserve legitimacy, authority, and cohesion while navigating economic transformation, military competition, and ideological change. A defining characteristic of the Ottoman rise was its institutional memory. By the time the empire reached this advanced stage, governance was no longer dependent on individual rulers alone, but on deeply embedded systems of administration, law, and social organization. Bureaucratic routines, fiscal practices, and legal norms had been refined over centuries, allowing the state to function even during periods of weak leadership. This institutional depth explains why the empire remained resilient despite repeated crises. The Ottomans understood governance as a continuous process, rooted in precedent yet open to modification when circumstances demanded. The relationship between the center and the provinces remained crucial. While central authority was symbolically absolute, practical governance relied on negotiation and compromise with provincial elites. Local notables, military leaders, and religious figures played essential roles in maintaining order and collecting revenue. Rather than dismantling these power structures, the Ottoman state often incorporated them into the imperial framework. This pragmatic approach reduced resistance and ensured continuity, reinforcing the empire's capacity to govern vast and diverse territories without constant coercion. Legal pluralism continued to serve as a stabilizing force. The coexistence of Islamic law, sultanic regulations, and customary practices allowed the empire to address complex social realities. Courts functioned as spaces where imperial authority intersected with local norms, providing legitimacy to state decisions. The law was not merely punitive, but administrative and conciliatory, designed to manage disputes, protect property, and regulate economic life. This flexible legal culture contributed significantly to social stability and reinforced trust in imperial governance. Economic transformation posed both opportunities and challenges. Global trade patterns were shifting due to European maritime expansion, altering traditional commercial routes. The Ottoman response was not passive. The state sought to regulate markets, protect domestic production, and adapt fiscal policies to new conditions. Urban centers remained vital economic engines, supporting artisans, merchants, and intellectual life. Despite inflation, currency fluctuations, and external competition, the Ottoman economy retained a degree of resilience rooted in agricultural productivity, internal trade, and state oversight. The military, long a pillar of the Ottoman rise, underwent gradual transformation. Traditional structures faced pressure from European technological and organizational innovations. While resistance to reform existed, particularly among entrenched military groups, the state increasingly recognized the necessity of adaptation. Efforts to modernize training, weaponry, and command structures reflected a broader awareness that survival depended on learning from rivals. This willingness to reform, even when contested, underscores the dynamic nature of the Ottoman rise. Naval power and maritime strategy also gained renewed importance. Control of seas and coastlines was essential for trade, defense, and diplomacy. The Ottomans invested in shipbuilding, port infrastructure, and naval administration to protect their interests in the Mediterranean and beyond. Maritime engagement connected the empire to global networks of commerce and conflict, reinforcing its role as a major geopolitical actor. Cultural continuity and innovation remained central to imperial identity. Architecture, literature, and religious scholarship continued to flourish, reflecting both tradition and adaptation. Public works projects symbolized state responsibility and benevolence, reinforcing loyalty among subjects. Education remained a cornerstone of governance, producing scholars, judges, and administrators capable of managing complex institutions. Cultural production served not only aesthetic purposes, but also political ones, projecting an image of order, continuity, and legitimacy. Religion remained an integrative function within the empire. Islamic institutions supported moral authority and social welfare, while non-Muslim communities continued to enjoy relative autonomy under imperial protection. This balance between religious legitimacy and tolerance was a defining feature of Ottoman governance. By maintaining this equilibrium, the empire minimized sectarian conflict and preserved social cohesion, even as ideological currents from abroad introduced new challenges. Intellectual exchange intensified during this period. Ottoman scholars and officials increasingly engaged with European ideas on science, administration, and military organization. This interaction did not imply wholesale imitation, but selective adaptation. Knowledge was filtered through existing frameworks, ensuring compatibility with Ottoman values and institutions. Such intellectual openness demonstrates that the Ottoman rise was characterized by learning and synthesis rather than isolation. Diplomacy became ever more sophisticated. The empire operated within a complex international system marked by shifting alliances and power balances. Permanent embassies, formal treaties, and diplomatic protocols reflected a professionalized foreign policy apparatus. Diplomacy allowed the Ottomans to manage conflict, secure trade advantages, and preserve sovereignty in an increasingly competitive world.